Hello everyone. Welcome to Mysterious 5. Our first case is the case of Carlos de Salazar. Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar was born in Bilbao, Spain. He had always aspired to become a doctor. Through hard work and determination, he achieved remarkable academic success at an early age. By the tender age of 26, he was both a doctor and psychologist, mastered various languages, and began his professional journey working as a physician. The young man was revered by his family and loved ones, namely for his intellect, strong sense of responsibility, and unwavering perseverance. He was highly regarded by his patients as well. They described him as being humble, kind, and wise beyond his years. However, beneath his swift ascent to prominence, a concealed struggle loomed. Over his years of study, the burden of his parents' high expectations and unyielding pressure exacted its toll on the young man's psyche, culminating in a grueling battle against depression and stress. One day, in November 1996, something unusual happened. Carlos, who was known for his punctuality, didn't show up to work. Concerned, his parents hurried to his house, only to discover that Carlos was nowhere to be found. They tried calling friends, associates, and other family members, but none had seen him. With no other option, Carlos's parents made a frantic call to the police and reported him missing. The search operation began almost immediately, with the police, local volunteers, and the entire community joining hands to find Carlos. But the task at hand was not an easy one. His last known whereabouts were unknown, rendering search efforts challenging and time-consuming. Ultimately, no traces of Carlos de Salazar were ever found, and his case gradually grew colder with each passing year. While authorities may have given up on Carlos, his family did the complete opposite. Over a span of 14 years, they never stopped looking for him, going as far as hiring private detectives and launching media campaigns in a desperate attempt to find him and bring him home. Yet, despite their relentless efforts, no traces of Carlos were ever discovered. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. After years of waiting, his family's hopes of ever reuniting with him started to wane. In 2010, Carlos was officially declared dead by the Spanish government. But 5 years later, on the other side of the Mediterranean, two hikers were on the verge of making a shocking discovery. Maremma, Italy, is a region best known for its plentiful supply of soft and sizable mushrooms. The hikers had brought minimal food provisions as they decided to rely on foraging mushrooms and other wild vegetation. Yet, their plan proved to be more difficult than they'd anticipated. They searched tirelessly for edible mushrooms, but their efforts were in vain. With no other option, they regrouped and ventured deep into a nearby forest. While forging ahead, a peculiar sight caught their attention. Heaps of discarded waste, littered cans, and empty bottles were strewn about. Curious, the group decided to follow the trail. They soon stumbled upon a camp nestled amidst the towering trees. Apart from a shoddily made tent, there were also a few tin cans brimming with rainwater. Even though the camp appeared completely deserted, they decided it would serve as a suitable resting spot. But they soon came to realize they were not alone. Suddenly, a man emerged from the camp and confronted them. He appeared worn down. His unkempt beard stretched almost a foot long, and his face was dirty and thin. Panic ensued as the hikers hastily made a break for it. They soon stumbled upon a forest ranger to whom they recounted what they had just seen. Intrigued, the forest ranger decided to venture back to the camp, eager to personally investigate and question the mysterious man. Reluctantly, the hikers guided the ranger through the dense wilderness before arriving at the campsite. It was there that the ranger confronted the man, and an involuntary interrogation ensued. With no other option, the man felt compelled to reveal his true identity. Dr. Carlos de Salazar. He confessed that this very camp had been his home since 1997. With a hint of doubt gnawing at him, the ranger insisted on seeing some proof of identity. After a deep sigh, Carlos delved into his coat pocket and handed over an expired passport, reaffirming his original claim. The hikers and ranger were completely baffled by how Carlos had somehow managed to survive in the wild for it seemed like years, or maybe even decades, without anyone noticing, all by himself. They thought to themselves, maybe he discovered a way to grow his own food, or maybe he managed to survive by scavenging from nearby towns like Scarlino. Regardless, he appeared visibly unsettled and lost in thought, likely due to discovery of his hiding spot weighing heavily on his mind. The confrontation concluded with Carlos and the group going their separate ways. Yet the two hikers couldn't help but feel compelled to notify the authorities. After all, what if that scruffy-looking man they just met was sick and needed help? What if he had loved ones who were desperately looking for him? Turns out, one of the hikers managed to snap a few photos of Carlos's passport when he wasn't looking. Upon their return to civilization, they immediately reached out to both the Spanish consulate and the local police. News quickly reached the Spanish police, who notified Carlos's parents. Upon receiving word of their son's reported sighting, their emotions were a mix of shock and excitement. Wasting no time, they immediately canceled all prior arrangements and booked a flight to Italy. Once there, Carlos's family and the Italian officers teamed up to search for the former doctor. They met up with the hikers, who guided them to the abandoned campsite where Carlos was last spotted just a few days earlier. Upon arriving at the campsite, officers and the family looked everywhere, but Carlos was nowhere to be seen. It was evident that he left in a hurry, as some of his belongings were left behind, indicating that he likely did not wish to be found. Furthermore, it turned out that the once highly esteemed doctor had forgotten all about personal hygiene. When the cops began scouring his campsite, they found heaps of trash, bottles, tattered clothes, and cans littered all over the place. Undeterred by despair, his family hoped the authorities would initiate an extensive search and rescue mission across the entire forest, but the local police force had a different idea. According to Italian authorities, Carlos's disappearance didn't technically meet the criteria for a missing persons case, since it was believed that he had intentionally chose to live in seclusion. As a result, the police decided against allocating excessive time and resources to find him. Refusing to surrender, the Salazar family decided to take matters into their own hands. For many days they roamed, tirelessly searching for their missing son in the vast and dense forest. Unfortunately, due to the forest's daunting size and damp weather, their mission yielded no results. With Carlos's father unable to stay any longer due to work commitments, they had no choice but to return to Spain, but not before making a solemn promise to return one day and continue the search for Carlos. Years have passed since that time. Carlos's parents have made multiple trips to Italy in their relentless search for their son, but their efforts have fallen short in finding any trace of him yet. To this day, no one has been successful in tracking Carlos down. Whether he still resides in the same woods where he was originally discovered or has relocated elsewhere is a mystery that may very well never be solved. Julian Hernandez. 18-year-old Julian Hernandez was an ambitious young man. He was a senior in high school, excelling academically with a plethora of extracurricular activities under his belt. With aspirations of continuing his education, his future looked brighter than ever as he sat down on his computer and applied to several prestigious colleges. However, when all of his applications were denied due to discrepancies between his name and social security number, Julian was bewildered. Anxious to resolve the matter, he sought the advice of his guidance counselor, hoping to find the source of the problem and resubmit his applications before it was too late. Little did he know, their efforts would unveil a past shrouded in darkness, one that would shake the foundations of Julian's life forever. After researching further into his history, they discovered that Julian had been reported missing 15 years ago. It turns out that all this time, he'd been living under a false identity, in blissful ignorance of a tragedy that befell him long ago. Determined to get to the bottom of this discovery, he later confronts his father, Bobby Hernandez, about his findings. Bobby fumbles his words as he desperately tries to elude his son's unrelenting questions, but ultimately gives in and confesses the horrible truth. Julian, feeling lost, confused, and unsure of what to do, later takes to Reddit, sharing his bizarre story and asking people for legal advice. On the website, he talks about how his father had changed both their names and social security numbers, erasing their past in order to evade the law, about how Julian's entire sense of self had been shattered and put back together again as he discovered who he really was, and about how this revelation only came to be because his dad couldn't provide tax info when Julian applied for college. He even mentions how he recalls his father asking him if he still loved him were he to learn about something terrible he'd done. Apart from being desperate for legal advice, Julian is also worried about his academic prospects, since all the straight A's and impressive ACT scores he'd achieved over the past 3 years would be for nothing if his records aren't fixed in time to reapply for scholarships. But first and foremost, he makes it explicitly clear that he didn't hold a grudge against his dad for what he did. To Julian, his father had done everything he could for him growing up, and he wants to know if there is anything that can be done to keep Bobby out of trouble, not just for his sake, but for the sake of Julian's little sister, so that his father would stay out of prison and be there to look after her. But the real question is, why would Bobby Hernandez, Julian's father, kidnap his own son? It all began in 2002, when Bobby and Julian's mother were embroiled in a fierce legal battle over custody of Julian. Bobby's wife eventually won, and the court awarded her full custody of 5-year-old Julian. One day, Bobby asked his former wife whether or not he could babysit Julian after kindergarten. She gullibly agrees, but when she eventually returns home, Julian and Bobby are nowhere to be seen. All that's left was a note from Bobby telling her how he intends to take Julian away for good. Hernandez had fled with Julian to Cleveland, Ohio. There, Bobby found himself a new home with his girlfriend and her children. For 13 long years, they lived as a family. After Julian came of age, he'd often asked his father what became of his mother. Bobby would reply that his mother was gone forever. As for Julian's Reddit plea, it had created an uproar among the online community. Many commented that even though Julian obviously wanted to look out for his old man, he should keep in mind there are usually two sides to every story, and his father may be far from the saint he perceived him to be. According to Bobby, he wanted nothing more than to be with his son, and so he took Julian away. But Julian's mom believed Bobby was just bitter, and his taking of Julian was meant to punish her for leaving him. Either way, it's hard to argue that kidnapping one's own child, depriving him of a mother's love, and making him believe his mother abandoned him is justifiable. Later on, when Julian's school counselor informed the police and Julian's mother received news that her son had possibly been found, her heart leapt with joy. Yet she remained wary of false hopes, as countless times in the past, similar reported sightings of Julian had been proven to be untrue. But when the police confirmed with certainty it was indeed Julian, she was overwhelmed with emotion and relief. As for Bobby, he was arrested on November 2015. Ultimately, with its unusual and complicated circumstances, the trial of Bobby Hernandez captured the attention of media outlets the world over. The fact that the victim in question was no longer a minor, suffered no abuse, and stood firmly at his abductor's side pleading with the jury to forgive his father for what he did, made it quite the challenge to prosecute. But after a lengthy court process, the jury ultimately found Bobby guilty of abduction, custodial interference, and forgery of documents, sentencing him to 4 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. As for Julian's mother, despite the passage of time, she never wavered in her faith that her son would one day return to her. For many years, she tirelessly searched near and far for any clues to his whereabouts, but time and again, her efforts were fruitless. Even so, she never lost hope that one day they would be reunited. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Following the discovery, she was reunited with Julian over the holidays, where the two shared a heartfelt and tearful reunion. William Bates. Just hours before his mysterious disappearance on August 30th, 1902, Dr. William Horatio Bates, a well-renowned and wealthy ophthalmologist in the heart of New York City, penned a hastily written letter. It was entrusted to his absent wife, Ada Seaman Bates, who was away visiting her mother. Intriguingly, the letter disclosed that he'd been summoned to a distant location alongside an old pupil of his to perform a series of surgical procedures without stating the duration of his absence. The doctor's palpable excitement regarding the compensation he anticipated for his work was palpable, which was bizarre. After all, why would a man of considerable fortune exhibit such fervor for financial gain? And what could possibly necessitate such urgency that he would abruptly depart without saying goodbye to his wife? The enigma only deepens as we recount that, after dispatching the letter, the doctor inexplicably vanished into thin air, neither sending any more letters nor returning home. Before his disappearance, Bates was at the pinnacle of his medical career. He not only possessed good looks, but also wealth, prestige, and the sought-after expertise of a skilled physician. Renowned for his uncanny medical insights, he was frequently sought after by colleagues looking for guidance on unusual cases. Armed with prestigious degrees from Cornell University and the College of Physicians and Surgeons, he had also served as an attending physician at esteemed institutions such as the New York Eye Infirmary and Bellevue Hospital. According to the intriguing allure, he dedicated 5 years to teaching ophthalmology at the reputable New York Postgraduate Medical School and Hospital. Clearly, he was not your average professional. His credentials commanded both respect and admiration. It didn't make sense for someone of such caliber and remarkable accomplishments to simply vanish. When he failed to resurface several days later, Mrs. Bates embarked on a desperate quest. She tirelessly reached out to acquaintances across the United States and Europe in search of any clues. William Bates was known to be an esteemed member of the Masonic Society, so she sought the aid of the local Masonic community. William's picture was distributed far and wide. Finally, a letter arrived from Britain. It spoke of a man bearing an uncanny resemblance to the missing doctor, who had somehow found himself working as a medical assistant at the Charing Cross Hospital in London after initially being admitted there as a patient. Rumors circulated that, when he first arrived at the hospital, he was emaciated with hollowed eyes and was almost on the brink of starving. This didn't make any sense to Mrs. Bates, as she knew her husband had ample resources stashed away in his bank account, more than enough to live a life of luxury in the Grand City. Without hesitation, Mrs. Bates boarded the next ship for London, eagerly anticipating a joyful reunion with her loving husband. But her hopes were shattered as soon as she stood before him. William was a stranger in his own skin, unable to recall their shared life. "I don't know why you bothered, madam," he uttered. "We are strangers," his words piercing through her heart. Reluctantly, the doctor agreed to accompany Mrs. Bates to a hotel in hopes she can help him recover his memory. There, he faintly recalled his hasty departure from New York, summoned aboard a ship to perform a life-altering operation on someone battling a treacherous brain abscess. Hope mingled with confusion as Mrs. Bates resolved to remain in London by her husband's side, desperate for fragments of their past to resurface within his memory. However, her heart was shattered once more when, after just 2 fleeting days together, Bates ran away. This time, Mrs. Bates would never lay eyes on him again. After having been abandoned once more, Mrs. Bates embarked on an exhaustive quest, tirelessly scouring Europe and the east coast of America in search of her husband. But her efforts proved fruitless, and her relentless pursuit tragically ended in 1907, with her life slipping away as she coddled a cherished portrait of her dearly beloved. 3 years later, Dr. J.E. Kelly, a close friend of Dr. Bates from their New York days, found himself passing through Grand Forks, North Dakota. It was there that Kelly recognized his long-lost companion. After being gone for 8 years at this point, Bates had established a modest ophthalmology practice in Grand Forks. Despite still having no recollection of his previous life in the Big Apple, Dr. Kelly managed to persuade Bates to return with him to New York. There, the 2 skilled doctors set up a joint practice. Bates, now 51 years old, was about to embark on a fresh chapter in his career. Although he was finally back home, Bates' memories of his previous life remained forever lost, leaving reporters who took interest in his case intrigued yet frustrated. Despite their best efforts, all they could gather were fragments of distant tales, painting a portrait of a wandering doctor in Europe who later found solace in the vast open plains of North Dakota. But Bates' story didn't end there. He went on to establish himself as an esteemed attending physician at the renowned Harlem Hospital and even found love once again. To the outside world, his life appeared to have regained its normal cadence, except for one striking anomaly: his adoption of an unconventional approach to ophthalmology. In 1917, Dr. Bates published this newfound approach to the world of eye care, a compendium of exercises designed to strengthen and improve vision naturally, called the Bates System of Eye Exercises. His theory was first published in the magazine Physical Culture, an outlet managed by well-known guru and infamous health fraud Bernard McFadden. The response was nothing short of phenomenal. Subscriptions to the magazine skyrocketed, and Bates soon developed a loyal cult following. 3 years later, Bates self-published a book titled Cure of Imperfect Eyesight by Treatment Without Glasses, where he argued his bizarre methods. The book was heavily criticized for its controversial take on eye care, presenting information that was, at best, heavily exaggerated and at worst, flat-out wrong. In his book, he asserted that eye strain and nervous tension were the primary causes of vision problems, rather than the eyeball shape or lens formation. He proposed that, through a series of eye exercises and achieving mental relaxation, one could reduce the severity or even completely cure vision issues. Bates' followers numbered in the thousands, all darting their eyeballs from one object to another and attempting to envision the serenity of pure black as a gateway to mental repose. They even went as far as looking directly at the sun, all in pursuit of improving their eyesight. By 1929, Bates and his bizarre methods were under fire from the Federal Trade Commission, who lodged a complaint against him for peddling fallacious and deceitful claims. Nevertheless, the allure of his teachings persevered, with many flocking to his side, enticed by the tantalizing prospect of attaining enhanced vision without resorting to conventional corrective eye care. Many of the followers who believed in the Bates method partook in this exercises called experiencing vivid yet fleeting glimpses of clarity. A select few were even able to bid adieu to their trusty eyeglasses for good. To this day, the mysterious disappearance of Bates remains an enigma, with no definitive explanation as to what exactly happened to him. Some speculated it could be a rare manifestation of aphasia, which is a possibility, but typically, that condition only affects communication abilities. Alternatively, the missing years in Bates' life were often characterized as episodes of amnesia, but even that diagnosis may not entirely fit the narrative. Contrary to his portrayal in the media as a complete loss of identity, people with amnesia typically retain knowledge of their identity, but may struggle with absorbing new information or forming new memories. Another potential explanation could also be dissociative fugue, a condition characterized by significant gaps in autobiographical memory and aimless wandering. Although extremely rare, occurring in just 0.2% of the population, some of the symptoms Dr. Bates exhibited appear to align with this condition. But there's another captivating notion to consider. Perhaps Bates orchestrated his own disappearance. Could it be that he grew weary of his mundane lifestyle? Maybe he found himself entangled in debt or simply yearned for an escape from the bonds of matrimony. Whatever the case may be, we may never truly know, for William Bates died in 1931, leaving behind a controversial legacy that persisted to this day. Mark's Panama Barns. In 1977, in the picturesque town of Hau'ula in Hawaii, it seemed as though Mark Barnes, a Vietnam War veteran from California, had it all. He was living in paradise with his girlfriend, Charlotte Moriarty, and their 6-month-old son, Marks. Mark was tending to his garden one sunny day when Charlotte casually mentioned she was going out for a walk. Little did Mark know it would be the last time he saw his girlfriend or his beloved son ever again. He searched for them desperately, but no matter how hard he looked, they were nowhere to be found. 3 weeks later, Mark reported them missing. Despite the desperate search for his missing family lasting 2 long, agonizing years, endlessly scouring the streets and hotels for any signs or news of their whereabouts, all his efforts proved to be in vain, and he began to wonder if he ever lay his eyes on his beloved family ever again. Stephen Carter Jr. was born in the Hawaiian Islands with a mysterious past, a feeling he could not shake. Born Tenzin Amia on January 16, 1977, all he knew was that he had been adopted at 4 years old. He was overcome with questions that mercilessly plagued him day after day. Who were his real parents? Why had they given him up? It looked as if these questions would go unanswered until one day, on January 16, 1977, he stumbled upon something that changed everything. It was just another ordinary workday at his sales job in Philadelphia. As he was scrolling through the latest news stories on his phone during lunch break, a peculiar headline caught his attention. It told the incredible story of Carlina White, a story that was about to change Stephen's life forever. As an infant, Carlina was taken from a medical facility by a woman dressed in nursing attire. She was only 19 days old. She grew up believing her kidnapper to be her biological mother, completely unaware that she was on the missing persons list. But decades later, with the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website, Carlina managed to solve her own case. Stephen was always told he'd been abandoned as a baby and sent to an orphanage. He could barely remember anything from those days, but he did recall deeply longing for someone to care for him. One day, after years of yearning, his dream came true. In 1980, Steve Carter Sr. and his wife had been planning to bring a new addition to their family. Steve was an Army officer stationed in Hawaii, and the couple decided to visit an orphanage. As soon as they laid eyes on 3-year-old Tenzin Amia, they knew he was the one. They were told by staff that Tenzin was half Native Hawaiian, despite having golden blonde hair, bleached pale skin, and dark blue eyes. The Carters never thought much of it. They gave the young boy a whole new identity, renaming him Stephen Carter Jr. after his adoptive father. Stephen's life drastically changed for the better soon afterward. he and his family moved to New Jersey, settling in a well-off upscale area called Medford Lakes. Growing up, even though he never wanted for anything, Stephen would still occasionally be haunted by his bewildering past. It certainly didn't help that the date on his birth certificate had been issued a month after he'd actually been born. Yet the ever-so-curious Stephen never expected his past to catch up with him. His adoptive parents had always been open about his adoption, celebrating Stephen's birthday in their own way, calling it their came to be our boy day. But as he grew older, questions arose that the Carters couldn't answer. All they really knew was that his biological father was Hawaiian. Stephen had grown up and become a college graduate, but the questions he harbored since childhood still lingered in the back of his mind. Now in his 30s, the answers he sought would finally be revealed, and it all began with a simple DNA test kit gifted to him on Christmas. The results confirmed he had a Scandinavian heritage, which explained his complexion. But most puzzling of all, there was zero trace of his Hawaiian roots. It was later that he stumbled across the news piece about Carlina White. He was astonished, and at the same time, filled with dread that perhaps his own story could be something similar. Yet, he didn't have the courage to find out. But his curiosity eventually got the better of him. With quivering hands and a pounding heart, he looked through the database of missing persons on missingkids.com, and what he saw made his stomach churn. First, he tried looking up his original birth name, Tenzin Amiya, but no records with such a name existed. After punching in his real birth date, however, a name came up, Marks Panama Barnes. In July of 1977, Marks was reported missing in Hau'ula, but it was an artist's rendition of Marks, what he'd looked like 30 years later, that cast away any doubt in Stephen's mind. The picture resembled him so much, it was almost as if he were looking in a mirror. Everyone around him, his friends, his family, were astonished by the resemblance, yet Stephen refused to believe any of it. That's when his wife stepped in, urging him to follow through and put all mystery to rest. But even if he arrived at the truth's door, did he have the courage to knock? Stephen felt a turmoil of conflicting emotions. It wasn't too late to turn back now, he thought. He could go on as if nothing happened and remain in a state of blissful ignorance. But he'd already made up his mind. He had to know. The Honolulu Police Department wasn't sure what to expect when they received a call from Stephen. After all, Marks's case had been open for 3 decades, and the chances of solving a case this old are usually slim to none. Only a DNA test could uncover the truth. 8 months later, the results finally came in, and Stephen's worldview, his identity, was shattered. His suspicions was proven right. His real name was Marks Panama Barnes. The day he went missing, Charlotte, his birth mother, had been wandering aimlessly for some time when she was caught trespassing on the premises of a privately owned area. After being questioned by authorities, she claimed her name was Jane Amiya. When asked about her son, Charlotte said his name was Tenzin and that his father was a native Hawaiian. She even lied about his birth date. Charlotte was admitted into a psychiatric ward. As for 6-month-old Tenzin, he was taken away from her and sent to an orphanage less than 30 miles from where he lived. When Charlotte got out of the hospital, she never came looking for her son and simply vanished into thin air. Marks's case would have never been solved had it not been for one key player, his half-sister. It turns out Charlotte Moriarty had a daughter by the name of Jennifer Monheimer. Jennifer was 8 years her brother's senior and had been living in New Mexico with her father when her brother and mother disappeared. When she learned of what happened, Jennifer was beyond traumatized and was determined to get to the bottom of it. In 2001, she flew to Hawaii and pleaded with police officers to reopen her brother's case. The police department then had a sketch artist illustrate what Stephen might look like as an adult. This would be the same picture Stephen comes across 10 years later. The case was finally solved, by its own victim no less. Stephen Carter Jr. had solved one of the longest missing persons case in American history. But his story still needed closure. After the dust storm of media attention finally settled, Stephen was ready to reunite with his biological family. It started off by getting in touch with his half-sister, Jennifer. Upon hearing from him, she was overwhelmed with emotion and relieved to have answers regarding her brother's whereabouts. Then Stephen reached out to his father, Mark, who was just ecstatic to finally get to meet his long-lost son. As for his biological mother, it remains unclear what happened to Charlotte the day Mark's was taken, as she was never seen nor heard from ever again. Vasily Gorgos. In the year 1991, on an ordinary morning in the picturesque countryside near Bacău, a city in eastern Romania, Vasily Gorgos, a seasoned 63-year-old farmer, informs his family members he'll be going on a brief business venture. This was nothing out of the ordinary for Vasily, as he had made this journey countless times before, primarily to trade cattle and other livestock. As usual, he embarks on his journey by train, having already bought his ticket. But unlike his other business trips, this time he doesn't come back home. And since he typically comes back on the same day, his family realizes something must have gone wrong and immediately calls the police. The police begin to look for clues. They interrogate people at the train station and canvass the area around Vasily's home, but find nothing. No evidence of a crime or foul play. Days go by without a trace. The weeks become months, and Vasily's family begins fearing the worst. Vasily's case grows cold over the years, and even though his family suspects foul play, the absence of any evidence denies them closure. For 3 decades, what happened to him remains a mystery. Countless questions remain unanswered until a glimmer of hope emerges. On August 29, 2021, a car came to a sudden halt in front of Vasily's family home. A 93-year-old man is inside. It's Vasily. He emerges from the back seat, appearing confused and disoriented. His family can't believe their own eyes. They ask where he'd been for the past 30 years. He tells them he was home. But things take an even stranger turn. They notice that he's donning the exact same attire he wore when he first disappeared. Even his train ticket from 30 years ago was still inside his pocket. The neighbors, who witnessed Vasily stepping out of the car, were left in utter shock by the entire scene, so much so that they failed to notice the car's driver or license plate. What's even more peculiar is that the driver never even left the car. The moment Vasily exited, the vehicle immediately bolted away. After a thorough medical examination, Vasily is determined to be in great health, apart from some neurological issues, but nothing unusual for a man his age. It appears he'd been well taken care of during his 30-year absence. Strangely enough, he can vividly remember his family, his house, and everything from 30 years ago. As for the past 3 decades, however, they remained a complete blank. Vasily Gorgos' story is one of the most unexplainable and bizarre disappearance cases of the modern day. It has left internet sleuths all over the world baffled and with far too many questions they'll probably never be answered. Even today, no one has any idea as to what happened to Vasily during those 30 years. Was he kidnapped? Did he suffer from some type of amnesia? Was he living in some alternate reality? Why was he wearing the exact same clothes he had on when he first went missing? And why did he come back with no memory of anything that had happened? For decades, Vasily desperately awaited some answers. 30 years later, the only thing they got was more questions and very few answers. The Burger King John Doe, Benjamin Kyle. On a late 2004 summer day in the small town of Richmond Hill, Georgia, an unconscious man was found next to a dumpster behind a Burger King. An employee from the fast food joint came across him while taking out the trash. He was lying on the ground, completely naked and swarmed by fire ants. He appeared to be suffering from some form of amnesia, as he couldn't recall his name. He didn't have anything on him either. No driver's license, no ID. It was as if somebody left him there. Paramedics arriving at the scene noticed the man's injuries were indicative of blunt force trauma. He was rushed to the hospital and later dubbed the Burger King Doe by the authorities. Investigators scoured missing persons database, yet no records matching his description were ever found. Confined to Memorial Health University Medical Center, the Burger King Doe lingered in a state of unconsciousness until he finally awoke. In a hazy state, he managed to recall that his name was Benjamin, but that was all he could remember. He chose the last name, Kyle, and thus became known as Benjamin Kyle. He still had no idea how he ended up behind that Burger King dumpster, and it became clear that he had suffered repeated blows to the head, potentially causing significant and potentially fatal damage to his brain. For the next decade, Kyle's life stood still as he desperately pursued any fragment of his past or anyone who might recognize him. He eventually recalled residing in Indianapolis, Indiana, and attending the University of Colorado. He also held a strong belief that he had siblings, perhaps brothers. A singular date became etched in his mind: August 29th, 1948, his supposed birthday. Kyle's hazy memories additionally hinted at a journey he might have taken through Richmond Hill in August 2004. But beyond that, his recollections faded into obscurity. After leaving the medical center, Kyle sought refuge at Grace House, a men's shelter. Ultimately, he crossed paths with Catherine Slater, a compassionate woman determined to help him unravel the mysteries of his past. Catherine scoured missing persons websites, sharing countless photos of Kyle in hopes that someone would recognize him. Alas, her efforts yielded no results. Kyle, or the Burger King John Doe, was diagnosed with retrograde amnesia in 2007. His DNA samples were dispatched to the FBI for analysis, while his fingerprints were compared against the NCIC database of criminals, yet no match was ever found. And despite the nationwide attention his story garnered, no one stepped forward to claim him either. It seemed as though his true identity was destined to remain a mystery. In 2011, he relocated to Jacksonville, Florida, where he earned a living as a dishwasher. He was also given a shack to live in, courtesy of a kind-hearted benefactor. Even though he still didn't know who he was, he finally accepted the cards that life had dealt him and forged ahead. But behind the scenes, his tale was about to take an unexpected turn. Kyle's DNA profile was regularly being compared to multiple genetic databases in an exhaustive search spanning more than 2 years by the police. Then, in a remarkable twist of fate, in September 2015, a genealogical match emerged and his long-lost biological family was finally identified. Naturally, this revelation also unraveled his real name, William Burgess Powell. Powell was a 67-year-old Indiana native, born on the 29th of August, 1948, the exact same date he recalled. With this newfound knowledge, Kyle, now officially Powell, could finally obtain the coveted ID card that had eluded him for so many years. His family was living in Indiana at the time. He had 2 brothers, and according to them, Powell had gone missing in 1976. As time passed, his family gave up on trying to look for him and just assumed he was dead. Thus, when his face became a fixture in the media, they failed to recognize him as they couldn't quite believe he was still alive. Powell may have experienced a peculiar type of memory loss called dissociative fugue state. Such a condition typically causes someone to inexplicably abandon their homes and loved ones. Over time, it can also lead to a gradual erosion of one's memories and ultimately the complete loss of their entire identity. Of course, not everybody buys into Powell's tale. Online detectives from across the globe have harbored doubts, suggesting that he was aware of his true identity all along, and his whole story was a ruse to try and run away from his past. No matter which side you're on, one can't ignore the facts. Powell willingly underwent DNA testing, offered his fingerprints for identification, and shared his whole story with the world. His active participation does lend a bit of credibility to his claim of being nothing more than a man with no recollections. Gabriel Nagy. In 1976, Gabriel Nagy and his wife Pamela arrived in Sydney, Australia, with dreams of a perfect life ahead. They were filled with joy when their first child, Stefan, was born. Then, in 1978, the family was blessed with another addition, a bright-eyed daughter they named Jennifer. At first glance, it may look as if everything was going perfect for the young couple, but not everything is as it seems. For Gabriel, it had all come too quick, too soon. He had never experienced family life before and found himself feeling overwhelmed by the sudden responsibilities. His wife and 2 children, Stefan and Jennifer, were his world, yet he struggled to keep up with the demands of marriage and parenting. His wife, Pamela, never noticed anything out of the ordinary with Gabriel, since he always kept to himself, mostly using work as an excuse to explain away his wearied demeanor. But a decade later, Gabriel's life would take a tragic turn. On January 21st, 1987, Gabriel made a call to his wife, informing her he would be arriving home in time for lunch. As minutes became hours and his plate grew cold, it seemed as though Gabriel had simply disappeared without a trace. Because it was so out of the ordinary for him to go anywhere without informing his family, local authorities quickly launched an investigation. The next morning, the family was devastated to find out that the charred remains of Gabriel's car had been discovered at the side of an empty road. 2 weeks later, the police came up with a promising lead. Gabriel had withdrawn cash from a bank in Newcastle, a small city located 100 miles from Sydney. They also found out what he used the money for: camping equipment, namely a sleeping bag, a tent, and some rope. Investigators hypothesized Gabriel was out camping somewhere in Newcastle, and a manhunt began. But after weeks of ceaseless search efforts, Gabriel was never found. The Newcastle police force later announced that, unless new evidence is discovered, they will be discontinuing their investigation into Gabriel's case. Devastated and barely clinging on to hope anymore, the family tried to move on, relocating to the Sunshine Coast in an attempt to start over. Although they had left their family home, they made sure to provide the police with all their details and contact information just in case Gabriel ever returned. With the passing of time, a harrowing thought began slowly inching its way onto the mind of Gabriel's loved ones, that Gabriel was dead. But after more than 2 decades of desperate searching and countless unanswered questions, a glimmer of hope emerged, an incredible discovery that could finally provide some much-needed closure. As a coroner prepared to declare Gabriel Nagy officially dead, an unexpected document was discovered revealing that a person with the same name had gone through eye surgery. The finding came from Medicare, Australia's healthcare insurance provider, who documented the procedure. A bit of digging revealed the medical records originally belonged to a man named Ron Sanders. Ron lived in Mackay, almost 1,000 miles from where Gabriel went missing. But why would he use Gabriel's name? This revelation brought forth more questions than answers. Several days later, Detective Georgia Robinson managed to get Ron on the phone. When Ron began talking, he opened up about his past, explaining how he doesn't really recall much of the last 2 decades of his life. Ron mentioned that he'd been completely lost in his own existence. Unsure of who he was, he spent many years hopelessly wandering one street after the other, without any form of shelter or comfort, until one day he stumbled upon the McKay's River of Life Church, where he now resided after finding purpose and refuge from his struggles. To confirm whether or not Ron Sanders was, in fact, Gabriel Nagy, Ron and Detective Georgia agreed to meet. Georgia knew that if Ron was Gabriel, the only way to help him reclaim his memories was to provide him with tangible reminders of his past. She began by showing him photographs, asking questions, and presenting him with letters from his wife and daughter. Soon enough, like a cascading waterfall, a surge of memories began to rush back in. The first thing he could recall was buying camping equipment in Newcastle with his credit card. He had no recollection whatsoever of being involved in a car accident, describing that part as a big blank in his mind. Not only that, but he'd been swallowed up by an overwhelming sensation of guilt, one he couldn't make sense of. He figured he must have been a criminal on the run, but looking back, this guilt likely stemmed from abandoning his wife and children. It is believed the traumatic accident he suffered from, the same one which wrecked his car, afflicted him with a rare form of amnesia known as dissociative fugue. The disorder erases huge periods of time from a person's memory, and in Gabriel's case, this meant his past life as a husband and father was completely forgotten. After crawling his way out of his wrecked car, Gabriel began to aimlessly wander. For 2 decades, he lived on the streets, relying on scavenging or, occasionally, the kindness of strangers to stave off hunger. He first set foot in Gladstone before finding his way to Rockhampton, where he took up a temporary job in a local farm. He then made his way through the quaint city of Cardwell, situated in Queensland's northernmost parts, where he came across a beach called Saunders Beach. The name was an immediate draw for him. Something about it suggested a sense of belonging, and considering he really didn't know who he was, he decided to adopt the name Ron Saunders as, according to him, it sounded pretty Australian. One day, he stumbled upon an old bike at a dump and used it to ride south for several days, only stopping for food and sleep. He eventually arrived at the city of Mackay. Exhausted and in desperate need of rest, that's when he encountered the pastor of the River of Life Church. Gabriel was nothing but a mere bag of bones when the pastor met him, his sunken eyes and hollow cheeks a clear indicator that he'd seen better days. Sympathetic to his condition, the kind pastor offered him food and shelter. After filling up his rumbling stomach, Gabriel showed his appreciation by dedicating his time to the church, working tirelessly as its caretaker. Gabriel spent the next 2 years living and working diligently at the church. One day, a flood of memories suddenly came rushing back to him. It was then he realized that Ron Saunders was nothing but a pseudonym. His actual name was Gabriel Nagy. Later on, he needed to get eye surgery performed and decided to use his real name when signing for the procedure. That's how Georgia managed to get a hold of him. After years of separation, Gabriel's family was filled with joy when they finally reunited with him. And although he wasn't planning on leaving Mackay anytime soon, he was still grateful to have them back in his life and remained in constant touch ever since. Harold Wayne Lavelle. On a sunny May day in 1977, 19-year-old Harold Wayne Lavelle left his Chicago home on South Pulaski Road to Aurora, Illinois. His mission? To seize a golden opportunity in the construction industry. He never returned home. He was described by his family members as tall, his slender frame accentuated by long sandy blonde locks that gracefully framed his face, with what many called an infectious smile. He often insisted on being called Wayne. Wayne disappeared at a time when one of America's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy, was still on the loose. John Wayne Gacy was born into a working-class family and appeared to have had a relatively normal upbringing. However, he displayed an increasing inclination toward sadism, which led to multiple run-ins with the law during the 1960s. In the 1970s, he gained worldwide attention for his shocking crimes. He was responsible for the brutal murders of 33 boys and young men. Prior to his heinous acts coming to light, at least on the surface, Gacy was known for his sociable nature and calm demeanor and was a regular fixture at community events where he would be invited to perform as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. Gacy's downfall began in 1978 when a young man named Robert Peist mysteriously disappeared. The investigation led to John Wayne Gacy, the last person to have been seen with him. With a search warrant in hand, the police began searching Gacy's house, where they uncovered a horrifying secret. As the officers continued their search, a putrid stench lingered in the air, seemingly trailing them even as they stepped outside the house. After learning it had been emanating for years, officers confronted Gacy and asked for an explanation. When asked, Gacy claimed it was due to moisture buildup, but as we all know, the truth was far more sinister. The remains of 29 boys and young men were later unearthed within or near Gacy's residence, while an additional 4 bodies were tragically discovered in the nearby Des Plaines River. During his trial, Gacy pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. His plea was supported by psychologists who diagnosed him as schizophrenic. Despite this, the jury rejected this notion, leading to Gacy's conviction for all 33 murders. In 1994, John Wayne Gacy met his fate through lethal injection. When news of Gacy's crimes came to light, Wayne Lavelle's family feared the worst. It all seemed to add up. Wayne's younger sister, Teresa Hasselberg, who worked as a nurse in Alabama, kept many newspaper clips about Gacy, while a brother of his, Tim Lavelle, would often read books about the infamous murderer. Tim and Teresa eventually concluded that Wayne had probably crossed paths with Gacy at some point, likely during one of Gacy's many killing sprees. They speculated that he might have been one of Gacy's unidentified victims, many of whom were buried beneath his house near Chicago. Teresa herself shared that detectives came across a piece of jewelry while examining one of the unidentified bodies. The piece of jewelry was said to belong to Wayne, according to his mother. This, coupled with the fact that a composite sketch of a Gacy victim strongly resembled Wayne, strengthening their conviction that Wayne had indeed fallen victim to Gacy's savagery. They couldn't know for sure, though, as the murders occurred between 1972 and 1978, a time when DNA testing wasn't widely available. As a result, remains found were nearly impossible to identify with conventional means. With no more leads to follow and 8 of Gacy's victims remaining unidentified, Wayne Lavelle's case would go cold for nearly 34 years. Then, in 2011, armed with new technology, investigators decided to take another look at the 8 victims' bodies. The Cook County Sheriff's Department requested DNA samples from individuals whose male relatives went missing in the late 70s, specifically those who were in their late teens or early 20s at the time. Wayne fit this description, and his family intended to provide a genetic profile for testing, hoping for a match that would provide some closure. But when the DNA results arrived, none of the victims matched Wayne's genetic profile. His family turned to the internet for answers. What they discovered left them utterly astonished. Instead of discovering the anticipated connection to Gacy, they stumbled upon something unexpected, something that brought forth more questions than it answered. It was an online police booking photo of Harold Wayne Lavelle, now 53, residing in South Florida. The name fit, the age fit as well, and despite more than 3 decades having passed since they laid eyes on him, they immediately recognized him, their long-lost brother. Detectives were promptly alerted and managed to locate Lavelle using his police mugshot. Turns out, back in 1977, 19-year-old Harold Wayne Lavelle had decided to run off from home after a heated spat with his stepfather and had no idea his family were convinced he fell prey to the infamous killer. Teresa and Tim quickly gathered funds and contacted their brother by phone. Within 2 hours of ending the call, they arranged for a bus to take him to Alabama. After arriving in Alabama, Lavelle dedicated the entire day to reconnecting with his family, sharing the stories of his past 33 years. Wayne, who was now 53 years old, shared that, following an argument with his mother and stepfather, he had decided to leave home with a little over $56 in his pocket. Recalling his sister's childhood tales of Florida being warm and beautiful, he made a spontaneous decision to purchase a ticket and travel there. In Florida, he spent 33 years working in shipbuilding and landscaping. Along the way, he had a few encounters with the law, mainly related to marijuana possession and domestic abuse, resulting in the booking photo that would inevitably play a crucial role in reuniting him with his siblings. Tragically, this reunion was bittersweet, as Lavelle's mother died in 2001, without ever finding out the truth about what happened to her beloved son. Petra Pazitka. In the mid-1984s, Petra Pazitka was a young woman living in Braunschweig, Germany. She was a 24-year-old computer science student, eager to conquer the world with her intelligence, passion, and cheerful personality. Petra led a seemingly ordinary life, residing in a cozy house she shared with fellow university students. She cherished her close-knit relationship with her family, who were eagerly anticipating the celebration of her beloved younger brother's birthday. All was set for a joyous occasion on the eventful evening of July 26, 1984. Little did anyone know that this night would forever be etched in their memories, not for the joyous celebration they had planned, but for something far more sinister. It all began with a routine dentist appointment that day. Petra was expected to join her family later, but minutes turned into hours, and Petra never showed up. Concern soon gripped the hearts of her loved ones. Unsettling questions danced in their minds as they struggled to comprehend Petra's inexplicable absence. This was only the beginning of the haunting tale to come. Immediately, the police were called, and Petra was reported missing. Authorities traced Petra's footsteps to a lonely bus stop, but from that point on, the trail grew cold. Some of her family members clung to the desperate hope that she had been taken against her will. Others resigned themselves to the fact that she likely been a victim of a vicious murderer, for the alternative, that she could willingly disappear from their lives, was unimaginable. 3 years later, in 1987, a shocking confession came from Gunter K., a notorious 19-year-old convicted murderer. He was already accused of killing a 14-year-old teenager near the very same bus stop where Petra was last seen. Gunter K. claimed that he murdered Petra and disposed of her body in a river, though her remains were never found. 2 years later, Petra was declared legally dead and her case was archived. The news devastated Petra's family. They couldn't bear the thought of their kind-hearted and vibrant girl becoming the victim of a senseless murderer. 31 years of pure anguish passed, with no closure, as Petra's body remained unfound. Her grieving parents and brother couldn't even give her a proper burial to honor her memory. But just when they thought Petra's story couldn't get any more twisted, everything changed in September 2015. During a routine police investigation into a reported robbery, the German police stumbled upon a peculiar tale. Its centerpiece, a 55-year-old woman with no official documents to her name. The woman, who identified herself as Mrs. Schneider, contacted the Dusseldorf City Police, wanting to see if she could file a complaint as her house had been robbed. However, when officers asked Mrs. Schneider for her official documents, she fumbled her words as she struggled to provide an explanation for their absence. Curious, officers pushed the issue. It was then that the old woman revealed She was none other than Petra Pazitska, the young German girl believed to have been deceased for decades. Petra admitted to orchestrating her own disappearance, meticulously planning and saving up money for months. It wasn't long before investigators delved into Petra's mysterious past. Like a phantom, she'd been living in solitude for 3 decades, evading detection and living a life of secrecy without any trace on official records. Petra told them she'd been residing in Dusseldorf for over a decade. Before that, she was constantly moving from place to place, financing her life through illicit means, the nature of which remained undisclosed. Petra operated without a bank account, relying solely on paying for everything in cash. Surprisingly, the authorities refrained from pressing charges as no concrete evidence of suspicious conduct or forged documents emerged. News of Petra's shocking story spread like wildfire, eventually settling on the doorsteps of her beloved family. Although her father was long gone at that point, her mother and brother were still alive and left baffled by the inexplicable turn of events. The motives that propelled her to this escape remain cloaked in secrecy, as Petra refuses to reconnect with her family or talk to the media to this day. In the present, Petra Pazitska still resides in Dusseldorf, but with no reason to hide anymore, she's now using her real name. Tanya Ryder. Tanya and her husband, Tom Ryder, were a young couple juggling multiple jobs to make their dream of owning a home a reality. On September 20th, 2007, Tanya's first gig of the day was at a supermarket in Maple Valley, Washington. After wrapping up a night shift at the store, she hopped into her car and set off for a few hours of some much-needed rest before heading to her second job. Completely worn out, she was only moments away from her home. However, the exhaustion from her jam-packed schedule had taken its toll on her, forcing her body to surrender. Suddenly, her grip on the wheel loosened, and Tanya's car drifted off the road, plunging into a deep ravine that stretched 20 feet below. She regained consciousness, only to find herself suspended upside down in her blue Honda, ensnared by the seatbelt and wedged tightly against the steering wheel. Several of her ribs were fractured, and her left leg had gone numb. Worried and anxious, Tom reached out to the local police when he couldn't get in touch with his wife, but the operator who answered the call all but refused his request to file a missing persons report, explaining that Tanya's case didn't meet the necessary criteria since she wasn't considered at risk nor a minor. Apparently, the operator also told Tom that his wife was a grown woman, free to go wherever she pleased without informing anybody. Tom wouldn't accept this. He knew his wife too well, and this behavior was out of character for her. Concerned, he began repeatedly calling the police station, recounting the entire story to each new operator he spoke with, until finally, one of them agreed to file a report. As for Tanya, her situation was nothing short of a nightmare. It had been days at this point, days she spent enveloped in darkness. Her only solace were the brief glimmers of light emanating from her phone, which always had Tom's name on display. Every time, she frantically tried to reach her phone, but the pain and binds which shackled her would force her to give up. Feeling helpless, she cried out her husband's name until he hung up. As the nightmare continued, Tanya found herself drifting in and out of consciousness, her eyes growing heavier with each passing day. She'd sometimes hallucinate reaching for her phone, dialing 911, only for the operator to laugh in her face before the line went dead. With every sleep she surrendered to, she would pray that upon waking, she'd find herself nestled beside Tom in the safety and comfort of her bed. Meanwhile, after countless pleas, Tom successfully managed to convince local authorities his wife was in danger. But instead of forming a search party right away, their attention immediately turned towards Tom himself. Although frustrated, Tom knew he had no other option. He willingly consented to a thorough search of their home and agreed to undergo a polygraph examination. After all, the sooner they could eliminate him as a suspect, the sooner they could begin looking for Tanya. After finally crossing him off as a suspect, investigators began to search by analyzing surveillance footage of Tanya at the supermarket parking lot, where she hopped into her car and drove away. This marked her last known whereabouts. They then meticulously examined her financial records, only to find her bank accounts remained untouched. Finally, they tracked her cell phone signal to a tower along Highway 169, situated in Renton, a suburb of Seattle. A thorough ground search was then carried out by the police. It took a mere 20 minutes for them to find Tanya. When they finally found her, Tanya had been trapped in a ravine for 8 days at this point. Her body was frail, starved, and severely dehydrated. She eventually gave up on hope and accepted her fate. Gradually, her agony subsided, and she recalled venturing towards a radiant meadow, basking in its warm embrace. "She's alive!" shouted one of the troopers after discovering her car. Immediately, they sliced through the vehicle's roof and pulled Tanya out. She was then swiftly airlifted to a nearby hospital. Upon arrival, Tanya's injuries were severe. Multiple broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, kidney damage because of toxins from the numerous muscle injuries, and a badly mangled left leg, which almost had to be amputated. Tanya awoke to the sight of her devoted husband, Tom, by her side. He had gone to great lengths to find her, offering a substantial reward, persistently urging the authorities to take the case seriously, and even submitting to a polygraph test. He never lost hope, trusting his intuition and unwavering belief in his wife above all else. Just like Tom, Tanya is also a hero in this remarkable tale. Severely injured and stranded in a ravine with no way out, she survived without food or water for 8 days, defying all odds. A few years later, she released a gripping memoir titled Missing Without a Trace, 8 Days of Horror, as part of her own journey towards closure and to enlighten others. While her absence may not have been as prolonged as some of the other cases we've covered, what Tanya went through is nothing short of terrifying. As such, her story is just as inspiring and deserves to be recognized. Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Whitaker came into the world on August 16, 1969. Born into a family of 7, Michelle cherished every moment spent with her loved ones. She was happy, full of energy, and a joy to be around. Yet, the tides of life changed once she turned 15, when her family relocated to Gastonia, North Carolina. A vivacious spirit with a heart as vast as the ocean, Michelle yearned for acceptance and approval from those around her. Her teenage years proved to be a turning point, as clashes with her mother became a regular occurrence. Michelle felt her mother was too controlling and her rules were too strict, igniting a rebellious flame within her. Charting her own path, Michelle thought about joining the Navy, but fate had other plans in store. Love struck her heart when she crossed paths with a Navy recruiter, a man several years her senior. Against her mother's wishes, Michelle took a step towards matrimony soon after high school graduation. Regrettably, her marriage was short-lived and soured by unhappiness. It was evident to all, including her mother, that Michelle needed a fresh start. This fresh start awaited Michelle and her family in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Still, as she approached her 30s, the road became increasingly treacherous. Juggling a mere part-time waitressing job, Michelle found herself barely scraping by, battling to make ends meet. One fateful evening, after a long day at work, Michelle unexpectedly crossed paths with a man named David. David seemed charming and charismatic at first, but his true colors surfaced after he offered her a ride home. He inflicted brutal harm upon Michelle, leaving her face battered and bruised. A year later, David was apprehended and charged with assault and battery, ultimately receiving an 8-year prison sentence. Soon after the traumatizing incident, Michelle's life took a downward spiral. she found herself drifting from her parents' home to her friends' houses, and at times even resorting to sleeping in her car, trapped in a never-ending cycle of uncertainty, anxiety, and depression. She eventually found herself behind bars due to a drunk driving incident. After serving her time, Michelle pledged to turn her life around. On August 5, 2002, an argument erupted between Michelle and her mother. It ended with Michelle storming out of the house. After she calmed down, Laura realized she wasn't sure where her daughter went. Her anguish only grew when a man Michelle had been staying with told Laura that he hadn't seen her daughter in days. Wrought with concern, Laura reached out to police, only to be met with the frustrating reality that Michelle was not considered an adult, leaving law enforcement with limited options. Fortunately, Laura had a friend from the neighborhood, Sergeant Alan Woods of the Spartanburg Sheriff's Office, who understood Michelle's transient lifestyle. He assured Laura that her daughter would most likely turn up soon. She didn't. On August 21st, 2002, an official missing persons report was filed. For Laura, it had been 2 sleepless weeks since anyone had laid eyes on Michelle. The silence was unnerving. The police went into action, delving into Michelle's life. They scoured her bank records, hoping for any sign of activity. They found nothing. They move on to interrogating the people closest to her ex-husband, her family, her co-workers, her acquaintances. They are all questioned, but no leads emerge. Then a breakthrough. The police discovered that a man named Doug Gilmore had been the last person to see Michelle on the day of her disappearance. They met at a local pool hall, spending hours together before embarking on a motorcycle ride. But that's where the trail went cold. Doug cooperated fully, even passing a polygraph test. He claimed to have dropped Michelle off at a truck stop the next morning, as she expressed a desire to head to Myrtle Beach, but he had no clue about her whereabouts after that. Frustrated and desperate for answers, Michelle's family took matters into their own hands. They created missing persons flyers, distributing them at the truck stop, hoping that someone had seen or knew something. But alas, no luck. As time went on, hope began to dwindle. The case grew colder with each passing day. Laura pleaded with local TV stations to keep her daughter's name in the headlines, hoping that someone, somewhere, would come forward with information. In August 2005, nearly 3 years after Michelle's disappearance, a chilling anonymous letter arrived at the police station. The words were haunting, claiming to know the exact spot where Michelle's lifeless body lay, nestled beside tall pines and perched delicately at the edge of a pond a mere 25 miles from the desolate truck stop where Michelle had last been seen. Authorities meticulously searched the area for 2 days, but alas, their efforts were in vain. It became more and more apparent that the letter was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. It left the investigators and Michelle's grief-stricken family shattered, appalled by the audacity of someone who would toy with their emotions. Just when the darkness seemed impenetrable, October 2005 brought another chilling case to the forefront. Jonathan Vick, a man accused of brutally murdering Dana Satterfield, the owner of a local beauty salon, was arrested. Dana was murdered inside her salon, which was approximately 12 miles away from Michelle's last known sighting. Police immediately began to suspect Jonathan had something to do with Michelle's case. It certainly didn't help he was a regular at the same diner Michelle used to work at. Jonathan also was a prime suspect in the puzzling disappearance of Heather Sellers, his former fiancée. Like Michelle, Heather also used to work as a waitress. However, concrete evidence connecting Jonathan to Michelle's case eluded detectives. In November 2006, Jonathan Vick was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Dana Satterfield. His sentence? Life, plus an additional 60 years. Interestingly enough, Jonathan was never formally accused in relation to the disappearances of Michelle or Heather. As time wore on and the shadow of Michelle's vanishing lingered for 5 years, her family decided to gather at a solemn vigil in her honor. Determined to keep her daughter's memory alive, Laura set up a heartfelt webpage adorned with cherished photos of Michelle spanning various stages of her life. Then, in a fateful turn of events, a shocking phone call reached Lieutenant William Gary in August 2008. On the other end of the line was a woman claiming that Michelle Whitaker was alive and residing in Oregon. The intriguing twist? She recognized Michelle from an episode of a TV show called Forensic Files and from the webpage painstakingly assembled by Laura. It turned out that Michelle had been living with mutual friends of the caller. The woman was determined to prove her honesty, so she snapped a photo of Michelle and sent it to Lieutenant Gary. Lieutenant Gary, in turn, showed the photo to Sergeant Alan Woods. In a bid to unravel the truth, the Spartanburg police enlisted the help of the Oregon State Police. An officer promptly paid a visit to Michelle's residence. After answering the door, she affirmed her identity as Michelle Whitaker, and a fingerprint test later verified she was indeed the long-missing woman. The officer told Michelle her family had spent 6 agonizing years searching for her. During an interview, Michelle confessed that her reason for running away was that she'd grown weary of her nomadic existence. The life she'd been leading had worn her down and drained her spirit. After the intense argument with her mother, she aimlessly roamed from place to place, convinced that her departure would alleviate at least some of the burdens her family carried. Originally harboring plans to make her way to Myrtle Beach and secure an under-the-table job, Michelle's fate took an unexpected twist on her final night in Spartanburg. It was there that she encountered Doug, who, after much persuasion, agreed to drop her off at a nearby truck stop, a chance encounter that would set in motion a whirlwind journey spanning Las Vegas, California, and ultimately Oregon. Michelle claimed she had been employing her real name throughout her journey, oblivious to the frantic search conducted by her desperate family. Michelle expressed deep remorse for the impact of her actions on her family, not to mention the extensive resources and man-hours expended by the police officers looking for her. She has since strengthened her bond with her family, particularly with Laura, and their relationship has flourished once again. Michelle McMullen. 27-year-old Michelle McMullen was a resident of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who relocated to Louisiana to complete her degree at Grambling State University. Michelle faced many hardships during her time in Louisiana, struggling to go through her education while making ends meet for herself and her 6-year-old son, Jalen. Eventually, she decided to move Jalen back home to Harrisburg. The plan was for Michelle to return to Louisiana to finish her studies, with her parents taking care of her son in the meantime. On September 28, 2008, Michelle arrived in Pennsylvania, but instead of going to her parents' house, she dropped Jalen off at a friend's house. Her parents only found out about her arrival at Harrisburg the following day. Michelle set off on her return journey to Louisiana after bidding her son goodnight and informing her friend that she would call again in a couple of hours. She never did, and that was the last time anyone heard from her. Following her disappearance, Michelle's car was discovered in Hagerstown, Maryland, with her wallet, cell phone, and other personal belongings still inside. On the 9th of October 2008, the Susquehanna Township Police announced that Michelle was wanted on charges related to theft. It was discovered that Michelle had been working as a secretary for the Progress Emmanuel Presbyterian Church and had stolen almost $2,400 prior to getting fired in July for her poor performance. Fast forward to December of that same year, when Harrisburg detectives receiving an intriguing tip, a woman resembling Michelle was spotted working at a hotel located in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where she managed to persuade the owner into hiring her by claiming she was fleeing an abusive relationship and desperately needed the cash. It all came to be when an old associate of Michelle's happened to visit the hotel and recognized the woman as his long-lost friend. When confronted, the woman insisted she didn't know him and claimed her name was Monique Watson, but the friend didn't buy it. Michelle's parents were called, but by the time police made it to the hotel, the mysterious woman was long gone. In February 2010, Disappeared, an American documentary television show, aired Michelle's story. Throughout the show's reruns, one keen-eyed viewer recognized Michelle as none other than her hairdresser, and a miraculous turn of events was set in motion. It turned out the woman from the hotel was indeed Michelle. She'd somehow ended up in California, where she met a beauty salon owner who she lied to about being a Katrina survivor. The owner took pity on Michelle and offered to take her in, treating her like a daughter and even teaching her how to style hair. After she got caught, Michelle claimed the $2,400 she took from the church were simply extra paychecks that she utilized solely for her educational pursuits. She was charged with theft, forgery, and fraud. She confessed to investigators that the fear of getting caught tormented her far more than any prison cell ever could. In the end, Michelle McMullen was sentenced to probation and a $6,000 fine. Teruya Nakamura. Teruya Nakamura was born on October 18, 1919. He belonged to the Ahmed tribe, an indigenous group in the islands of Formosa, which was a Japanese colony at the time. He was 20 years old when the Second World War broke out. Nakamura's early years were marked by a relentless battle against poverty. With no means of providing for himself or his loved ones, and driven by a sense of duty to the greater cause, he decided to enlist in the Takasago volunteer unit of the Japanese Imperial Army in November 1943. Following his enlistment, he was stationed on Morotai Island in the Dutch East Indies. Then, on September 15, 1944, American and Australian forces launched an attack on the island in a mission that would later be recognized as the Battle of Morotai. The Japanese soldiers displayed great tenacity in battle, yet they faced overwhelming odds and endured significant losses. While many of the remaining Japanese forces chose to surrender to the Allied troops, a few opted to retreat into the dense jungle interior of the island, where they planned on making their last stand. Nakamura himself was resolute in his determination to never surrender, and his unit was tasked with carrying out guerrilla warfare tactics should the need arise. In the following months, the majority of the remaining Japanese army members either surrendered, were captured, or succumbed to hunger and illness. However, amidst this dire situation, Teruya Nakamura stood unwavering with a small band of stragglers. Despite lacking any means of communication with the outside world, they were all determined to fight until the last man. 2 months after the assault on the island began, the Japanese army declared him and his comrades dead after losing communication with their unit. Little did anyone know that Nakamura was in fact alive, albeit not exactly well, and it would take 3 whole decades for his family to uncover the truth. For 12 years, he managed to survive on a diet of bananas and fish caught from the surrounding waters of the island. That's not to say he was entirely on his own. He was accompanied by a group of fellow Japanese soldiers who, due to the loss of radio communication with their commanders, were all unaware that the war had come to an end in September of 1945. In that very same year, leaflets were scattered over the island announcing Japan's surrender and the end of the war. But Nakamura and his comrades brushed the leaflets off as mere enemy propaganda. One of the main reasons they firmly believed that the war was still in progress was the constant presence of airplanes flying over the island. As these aircraft became more advanced, they assumed that there was an ongoing arms race between the Allied and Axis powers. However, the truth was that there was an Indonesian Air Force base nearby, and what he was witnessing was merely daily practice flights. In 1956, Nakamura parted ways with his comrades, allegedly due to an attempted attack on his life. He ventured forth alone, constructing a humble hut amidst a vast field. His survival primarily hinged upon cultivating sweet potatoes and foraging bananas from nearby trees. To occupy his mind, he fished regularly and tinkered with a self-made abacus. Employing utmost caution, he limited his cooking activities to the cover of darkness so as to conceal any telltale smoke from prying eyes. By observing moon cycles, he would count the passing days and mark the passages of months and years by tying knots on a rope. With almost no human contact whatsoever, what largely kept him going was his clinging to the hope that he'd one day be reunited with his loved ones. Survival became his sole purpose, consuming nearly all of his time and energy. Eventually, Nakamura managed to befriend one of the locals, a kind old man who would, on occasion, bring him some essential provisions and small luxuries like tea and coffee. This went on for several years until the old man passed away. As the old man lay on his deathbed, he entrusted his son with looking after Nakamura. There is heavy speculation that instead of fulfilling his father's wishes, the son might have chosen to inform the local authorities about Nakamura's presence on the island. The discovery. While some reports believe that the old man's son was the one responsible for notifying the authorities about Nakamura's whereabouts, others claim that it was a pilot who chanced upon his hut while flying over the island. Irrespective of the manner in which the information was obtained, in November 1974, the Indonesian government received information suggesting the presence of a former Japanese army member residing on the Morotai Island. Collaborating with the Japanese embassy, they coordinated a search mission to investigate his potential holdout. In a bid to draw Nakamura out of hiding, searchers waved a Japanese flag and sang the country's national anthem. Their efforts proved fruitful when, on December 18, 1974, Nakamura, then 55 years old, finally emerged. Despite being naked, unkempt, and utterly exhausted, he displayed a remarkable sound physique. After being transported to a hospital in Jakarta, Nakamura was given a clean bill of health. Subsequently, Indonesian authorities facilitated his return to Taiwan, where he would finally be reunited with his family. Upon his return home, he couldn't wrap his head around how much had changed. His parents, once pillars of his life, had passed away. His son, who was but an infant when he enlisted, had blossomed into a mature man with 4 children of his own. Meanwhile, his wife, believing he had died in the war, had remarried. And then there was the matter of his pension. When Nakamura joined the army in 1943, Taiwan was under Japanese colonial rule. Throughout his 30 years on Morotai, Taiwan came under the administration of the Republic of China. Despite Nakamura's service in the Japanese Imperial Army, the Japanese government refused to provide him with the back pay he rightfully deserved for his pension, arguing that he wasn't technically a Japanese citizen. Understandably, this incident sparked public outrage. Curiously enough, just a few months prior to Nakamura's return, Hiro Onoda, another World War II-era Japanese soldier, was discovered hiding out in the Philippines and ended up receiving his full entitlements. The government justified this decision by noting that Onoda was a Japanese national who held the rank of officer, whereas Nakamura only held the rank of private and wasn't even Japanese. In the end, in exchange for his 30 years of service, Nakamura was awarded a grand total of 68,000 Japanese yen, equivalent to approximately $227 at that time. Following widespread public outcry and intense media scrutiny, the Taiwanese government decided to make a donation of 4,250,000 Japanese yen to Nakamura, a sum that closely mirrored the payout received by Hiro Onoda. Upon his return to Taiwan, Nakamura would find himself often overcome with weariness, despite his outward appearance of good health. However, he'd often state that the prospect of finally being reunited with his family kept him going. Evidently, his wife's new husband offered to let the old couple reconcile and was even willing to move out and give them space. But Nakamura, not wanting to disrupt their lives, was content with purchasing a home nearby and visiting them frequently. Ultimately, Tahiro Nakamura led a quiet and peaceful life with his family for the next 4 years. Sadly, on June 15, 1979, after a long and tiresome battle, he succumbed to illness. Despite enduring years of isolation, Tahiro Nakamura left behind a lasting legacy as a courageous man and a devoted soldier. Edgar Latulip. Edgar Latulip was a 21-year-old Canadian young man living in Kitchener, Ontario. Growing up, Edgar suffered from psychological issues and faced several developmental challenges. He had a long history of residing in psychiatric hospitals and group homes. Sylvia Wilson, his mother, described him as more or less functioning at a child's level. Understandably, Edgar's disabilities and the various hardships he faced during his upbringing left him feeling somewhat depressed and dissatisfied with his life. The fact that he was already 21 years old without any promising prospects certainly didn't help, and only added to his sense of despair and hopelessness about the future. Eventually, these emotions culminated in a deadly incident orchestrated by Edgar himself, one that left him hospitalized and seriously injured. His mother laid eyes on him in January 1986 after he was hospitalized. She recalled his alarming weight loss and expressed deep concern for his welfare. 9 months later, on the 2nd of September 1986, Edgar suddenly vanished into thin air. At the time he went missing, he was relying on a disability pension for survival, residing in a community home where he'd receive regular meals and occasionally participate in group activities. Investigators later discovered he bought a ticket to Niagara Falls from a local bus terminal, but his trail grew murkier from there. This finding was especially concerning, as Niagara Falls carries a somber reputation for being the final resting place to many burdened by grief and despair. Concern gripped the hearts of Edgar's family members and the Waterloo Regional Police Service, for they feared that he may have journeyed there to confront his inner demons. Years passed by since then, and in 1991, Victims of Violence, a non-profit organization, announced that they would be placing images of missing persons, including Edgar, on display at prominent airports and other public venues, in the hopes that somebody passing might recognize them. Despite their valiant efforts, the Waterloo Regional Police Service was unable to uncover any leads on Edgar's whereabouts. Nevertheless, their determination to find answers remained unwavering. In 1993, they pursued a reported sighting in Hamilton, only to discover that it led to another dead end. As time passed, the chances of a happier ending to Edgar's tale grew increasingly slim. A decade and a half later, in late 2008, the Waterloo Regional Police Service announced they would be re-examining several missing persons cases. This led Sergeant Richard Dorling to consolidate all 20 ongoing missing persons cases in the region under the jurisdiction of the Homicide Division. The sergeant expressed his deepest desire to eventually provide solace to all the families who have been clinging on to the slightest glimmer of hope. Edgar's case had remained stagnant for years at this point, and not a single sighting was ever reported. Wilson began to wrestle with the unsettling notion that perhaps her son was murdered. It was a possibility that couldn't be ignored, as Edgar's psychological condition and developmental challenges made him more than vulnerable to trusting the wrong people. Without any leads or clues to follow, Edgar's mother found herself teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown. As time passed, she slowly began to lose hope of ever laying eyes on her beloved son ever again. But in a stunning turn of events, on February 10, 2016, after more than 30 years since he went missing, a miracle happened. Edgar Latulip was found alive and well, living in St. Catharines. With Edgar found, It was only a matter of time before the full story behind his disappearance would unfold. It was revealed that back in 1986, Edgar had departed from Waterloo region and journeyed towards St. Catharines. Along the way, he made a pit stop in the Niagara region. At some point following his arrival, he suffered a traumatic head injury that had a profound impact on his memory. When he finally came to, he found himself unable to recall much of his past. Bereft of his memories, he had no other option but to create a fresh identity and start life anew, oblivious to the fact that his family in Waterloo had been frantically searching for him. Throughout his time in St. Catharines, Edgar kept a remarkably low profile. He didn't go out much, if at all, and relied on social services for support. He also abstained from using social media. It wasn't until January 2016 that the mystery surrounding his case finally came to light. It all began when he started experiencing visions and catching fleeting glimpses of a past life he had lived long ago. Eventually, he reached out to his social worker in St. Catharines and confided in her about these visions, believing them to be the resurfacing fragments of his long-forgotten memories. He shared his belief he may have been suffering from amnesia and that his real name was Edgar LaTulip. The social worker did everything in her power to help Edgar. She took to the internet to look up his name and stumbled upon a fascinating discovery. Sure enough, it turned out that 30 years ago, a certain Edgar LaTulip had indeed gone missing in Waterloo. The authorities in St. Catharines reached out to Edgar for an interview, and to their surprise, he began recollecting other pieces of information that he had long forgotten, memories only Edgar himself would have known. To cast aside any doubt, he agreed to submit a DNA sample to be compared with Wilson's DNA, who, incidentally, had also provided a DNA sample to Waterloo Regional Police Service the previous autumn. To everyone's shock, it was a match. The man in St. Catharines was indeed Edgar LaTulip. When the DNA test came back positive for a match, Wilson was left in awe of the incredible discovery. Sadly, Edgar had a father who would never learn what became of him as he passed away in 2000. Adding to his tragedy, his mother stood as the sole surviving family member who still wished to be reunited with him. Nonetheless, after 30 long years, mother and son were at last reunited. When they finally met, Wilson could barely recognize her son. The last time she had laid eyes on Edgar, he was an anguished 21-year-old. Now, he stood before her as a contented 50-year-old man, exuding a newfound sense of peace and vitality. Edgar, filled with remorse, began by apologizing to his mother for what he put her through. He excitedly informed her that he built a fulfilling life in St. Catharines, telling her about the many new friends he made and how he'd finally found a place where he truly belonged. Every year, approximately 70,000 to 80,000 individuals are reported missing in Canada. While most are located within a week, a decent amount is never seen nor heard from ever again. Edgar's disappearance stands out as one of the longest missing person cases ever investigated by the Waterloo Regional Police Service. Richard Hoagland. Richard Hoagland was a middle-aged family man hailing from Indiana in the U.S. He was married once, but his first marriage quickly fell apart. Even though he went through a difficult divorce once, he never gave up on love and remarried a woman named Linda Eisler in 1982. The couple were very much infatuated with one another, and it appeared as though their love would last forever. One day, the loving couple was blessed with 2 sons, Douglas and Matthew Hoagland. They cherished their children dearly and worked tirelessly to provide for them. Linda believed she had found her perfect match in her husband. Hoagland was energetic, funny, and a joy to be around. All things considered, life was perfect for the couple, at least until that one fateful day. On February 10th, 1993, Linda received a call from Richard. He told her he wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the hospital. He assured her that he would be back later in the evening. At the time, Linda didn't think much of it, but little did she know it would be the last time she ever said goodbye to her loving husband ever again. The very next morning, she reached out to the hospital her husband went to and asked how he was doing. However, to her dismay, the hospital claimed to have no record of a patient by Richard's name. And despite her persistent efforts to contact him, Richard was nowhere to be found. Filled with concern, the devoted wife's heart raced as panic overcame all emotions. Leaving no stone unturned, Linda looked everywhere for Richard, from their home to his workplace. Eventually, Linda's desperation grew until she finally gave up and asked the authorities for help. Soon afterward, an urgent investigation and search was set in motion. Concerned friends, families, and locals banded together in an effort to locate Richard. Sadly, their search yielded no results. Eventually, a breakthrough came when the police discovered Richard's vehicle meticulously parked at the local airport. It appeared untouched, and evidence pointed towards it being deliberately abandoned. Despite the bitter conclusion of his past marriage, nobody suspected that Richard was discontent with his new spouse. Their relationship seemed perfect on the surface, but then again, looks can be deceiving, and sometimes only the passage of time can reveal the most hidden of truths. Several months passed, and to everyone's surprise, Richard's two sons unexpectedly received 2 birthday cards. Each card contained a crisp $50 bill and a heartfelt note signed off by none other than Richard himself. It read, "Maybe sometime soon we will set to see each other, but I bet I won't even know you. It has been so long. Mind your mother. Bye, Dad." Needless to say, the cards and the message they contained would inevitably raise a few eyebrows. Some speculated the whole thing was an act, perhaps orchestrated by a kind stranger or relative, intending to provide solace to the grief-stricken family, or instill a glimmer of hope in Richard's kids that their father may yet return. On the other hand, law enforcement started to harbor suspicions that perhaps Linda had murdered Richard and had fabricated the missing persons report as a smokescreen for her actions. Another theory floating around was that Richard might have been entangled in illicit drug trade, prompting authorities to bring Linda in for questioning at the police station. In the end, the questioning proved fruitless, and Linda was eliminated as a suspect. Years passed by, and a decade of relentless investigation ensued, yet no answers were ever found. Eventually, Richard Hoagland was declared legally dead by the state of Indiana, despite the lack of any evidence to support this claim. Tragically, with Richard being the main provider for the family, Linda and her 2 sons faced immense hardships following his sudden disappearance. Their eldest son, Douglas, found solace in drugs as a means of navigating their dire predicament. His addiction led him down a destructive path, resulting in several encounters with law enforcement and ultimately his imprisonment for drug possession, along with an 8-year sentence. Linda, now burdened with the loss of both her husband and her son, faced a profound impact on her mental well-being, leading her down a rabbit hole of depression and desperation. And yet, in the face of such grim circumstances, Linda recognized her sons depended on her now more than ever. With determination, she summoned the strength to rise from despair, not for her own sake, but for the sake of her 2 boys. Slowly but surely, she mustered up the strength to move forward, remarrying and embrace a fresh start. It seemed as though life had finally turned a corner for her. However, there was one last thing fate had in store for her. In the summer of 2016, an unexpected phone call shattered the peace she had worked so hard to rebuild. The Pasco Sheriff's Department in Florida delivered a shocking revelation. Richard Hoagland, her supposedly deceased husband, was in police custody. As anticipated, Linda simply couldn't fathom the words she was hearing. It almost sounded like a cruel joke, but when she finally laid eyes on Richard Hoagland, now 63 years old, after 23 excruciating years, the only thing she could think about was, where had her husband been all this time? Turns out, the answer was quite simple. Back in 1993, the couple was struggling financially. Richard simply couldn't cope with the pressure and didn't feel like this tunnel had a light at the end. So he did the only thing he could. He ran away. Apparently, he'd also entered into a third marriage with a woman named Mary and had even another son. And yet, his self-centered choices and blatant disregard for his family's well-being aside, one key puzzle piece remained missing. 23 years is no small amount of time. So how did he manage to stay under the radar for so long? After fleeing from Indiana, Richard made his way to Florida, where he rented an apartment. It was there that he stumbled upon a death certificate belonging to Terry Szymanski, a man who died in a tragic boating accident back in 1991. In a peculiar turn of events, Richard managed to get a hold of Terry's birth certificate from the registry office, which he then used to get a driver's license. He'd go on to use that as proof of identity for everyday purposes. Under Terry's name, he and Mary obtained mortgages and bought a home. But sooner or later, the truth always resurfaces. After more than 2 decades of lies and deception, fate finally caught up with Richard. It all began when Terry Szymanski's actual family was researching their ancestry on Ancestry.com. They were astonished to discover that, just 2 years after his burial, Terry had apparently gotten married in Florida. But due to the bizarre and admittedly unusual circumstances, it would take another whole 3 years before the police would get involved. After an extensive investigation, they were shocked to discover that the man they had relentlessly looked for and ultimately pronounced dead had masterfully deceived them all. Detective Anthony Cardillo from the Paso County Sheriff's Department in Florida made his way to Richard's residence. Richard, who stubbornly maintained his real name was Terry Szymanski, quickly gave up on the facade once confronted with Terry's death certificate. Cornered and with no escape, he was arrested, brought in for questioning, and ultimately confessed. When Richard's true identity came to light, his wife at the time, Mary, was understandably taken aback by the stunning revelation. She confided in the authorities, saying that her husband had always left many questions unanswered whenever she asked about his past or relatives. At the time of Richard's sentencing, his son, Douglas, was incarcerated for drug possession. This didn't stop him from writing a heart-wrenching letter to the jury, detailing how his father's self-centered choices had profoundly impacted his life and ultimately led him to where he was now, behind bars. Meanwhile, his other son, Matthew, somewhat empathized with his father, despite acknowledging that nothing could excuse his behavior. In the courtroom, Richard's attire was impossible to ignore. He sported sneakers, worn-out pants, and a threadbare polo shirt that seemed plucked straight from a thrift store. It was as if he deliberately dressed this way, sparking speculation that his shabby appearance was a calculated act to portray himself as poor. Of course, the reason was obvious. Richard knew his older wife would want to be reimbursed for the 20 years of unpaid child support. In the end, Richard Hoagland pleaded guilty to identity theft and received a 2-year prison sentence. A month after his release came the awkward reunion with his family, the very same family he had abandoned for decades. Not much was said. Following his release, he was promptly deported back to Indiana. By that point, he was completely broke. This meant he was unable to fulfill Linda's legal claim, which accused him of neglecting his sons and evading child support for 23 years. Despite the fact that the court ruled in Linda's favor, awarding her a substantial $1.86 million, In the end, Richard got what he wanted, as he was deemed unable to provide restitution. Brenda Heist. Brenda Heist was an average mother of two living in Pennsylvania alongside her husband, Lee Heist. On one fateful morning, on February 8, 2002, Brenda said goodbye to her 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter after dropping them off at school. It would be the last time they ever laid eyes on her. When the children returned home that day, they were met with an eerie silence. The house stood empty, devoid of any signs of life. Their mother, who'd usually greet them with a smile as soon as they entered, was mysteriously absent. Dinner preparations were left abandoned, the laundry remained unfinished, and there were no signs of a struggle to indicate a kidnapping took place. Sensing something was amiss, the children reached out to their father, who promptly contacted the authorities to report their mother missing. 4 days later, her car was discovered in a parking lot near a bus station in a neighboring county. Brenda's sudden disappearance raised suspicion among the police. It happened during a challenging period in her life, and she and her husband had divorced and were in the midst of a grueling custody battle for their children. The police looked everywhere for her, going to great lengths and even forming a dedicated cold case task force. Yet, despite all their best efforts, Brenda's whereabouts eluded them. Over the course of time, investigators narrowed down Lee Heist, Brenda's husband, as the primary suspect in her case. However, after undergoing a polygraph test and with no evidence suggesting he had anything to do with his wife's disappearance, he was exonerated. Despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, Lee Heist's life took a tragic turn for the worse soon afterward. Struggling financially in the aftermath of his wife's disappearance, he ended up losing his job and was forced out of his home. Even his children weren't spared the consequences. Still regarding him as a potential suspect in a murder investigation, people refused to allow their children to befriend his own. Eventually, in 2011, Lee managed to have Brenda declared legally dead and collected her life insurance money, which amounted to almost $100,000. Then, in April 2013, a gut-wrenching terror consumed the family as they received a call from Detective John Schofield of Littitz-Borough Police. Lee anticipated that the purpose of the call would be to deliver the news of Brenda's remains being discovered. Instead, what he heard was the last thing he expected. Brenda had been found alive. A day earlier, a 54-year-old woman claiming to be Brenda had made her way to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and voluntarily surrendered, telling police officers that she was a missing person. Weary from a life on the run, she stated that she was tired of living on her own and wanted to go home. When she walked into the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, Brenda had been gone for 11 years. After officers confirmed she was, in fact, who she said she was, Brenda took to recounting her story. She revealed that after realizing her marriage was falling apart, she applied for housing assistance in hopes of securing an apartment. Unfortunately, her plea was denied and she was overcome with sadness. She sat alone in the park, tears streaming down her face, lost in thoughts of how she would go about raising her children. According to her recollection, it didn't take long before she was approached by 2 men and a woman who asked her what was wrong. Upon sharing her story, they extended an invitation to her to hitchhike with them down to Florida. As desperate as she was, it didn't take much convincing for her to accept their offer. She parked her car in a nearby bus station parking lot and went to join them. Her first 7 years were spent living in a trailer home with an unknown man, scraping by and undertaking any odd job that came her way, such as cleaning homes or babysitting. At one point, during her time in Florida, she got hold of a stolen driver's license after nabbing it from one of her housekeeping clients' homes. She also accumulated charges related to marijuana possession as well as numerous traffic violations. Sadly, while she was living her life to the fullest in Florida, her son and daughter lived in total anguish, not knowing what became of their beloved mother. Eventually, Brenda and the man she was living with had a falling out, as she quickly found herself living on the street. In her later years, she primarily sought shelter in tents and under bridges, relying on scavenging restaurant waste and engaging in panhandling to sustain herself. She managed to successfully evade investigators all this time by using a fake name, and it was discovered that many of the warrants issued against her were under that name. Apart from all that, much of the details surrounding Brenda's time away from her family remained shrouded in mystery. There was, however, a woman named Sandra Forrester who claimed to have known Brenda in 2010. According to Forrester, Brenda, who went by the name Lovey Smith, used to clean her Florida home. It all began when Brenda was recommended to her by a fellow neighbor. Forrester was in search of a housekeeper at that time. The neighbor, who'd previously enlisted Brenda as a babysitter, spoke highly of her. Initially, Brenda's interactions with Forrester were limited to small talk during Brenda's weekly cleaning visits. However, as time passed, their conversations delved into deeper, more personal matters. Brenda ended up warming up to Forrester and confided in her that she had a bad relationship with her boyfriend. Forrester felt bad for Brenda and decided to help as much as she could. As the weeks went by and her relationship with Forrester strengthened, Brenda began recounting a turbulent past marred by abuse, sharing that her former partner was an alcoholic. In a compassionate tone, Forrester assured Brenda that her door would forever remain open to her. As Brenda continued to visit Forrester's home, their interactions became more frequent. Forrester cautiously began to inquire more about Brenda's past. Brenda ultimately disclosed to her that she was a widow with no children to call her own. She said she had been married for like 20 years to a man named Lee, and he had worked for the Marriott, and they had traveled around and visited amazing places, and he had died, Forrester said. Eventually, Forrester extended an invitation to Brenda to live with her as a full-time housekeeper. With some of her belongings in tow, Brenda moved in, staying at Forrester's home for a span of 10 to 11 months. During this period, she spent most of her free time on the computer, using her cell phone, maintaining an active Facebook presence, and even frequenting an online dating site. Adding another layer of intrigue to the story, Brenda had apparently grown so confident in her charade that she went ahead and revealed her true last name to Forrester's son, after forging a close bond with him during their time together in the family home. The kid was around the same age as Brenda's own son, whom she abandoned a decade ago. The aftermath. After turning herself in, Sergeant John Schofield engaged in a detailed conversation with Brenda Heist. As per Schofield's account, Brenda was facing charges in Florida related to theft, drug possession, and possession of drug paraphernalia. Schofield portrayed her as highly emotional. With her head hung low and overwhelmed with shame, he described her as teary-eyed and remorseful. Understandably, even though Brenda had finally returned home, her family still harbored resentment toward her. Her ex-husband claimed that their children had no interest in speaking to her. "I don't think she deserves to see me," expressed her 20-year-old daughter, Morgan Heist. "I don't really have any plans on going to see her." Morgan's anger towards her mother is perhaps best captured in a deleted post she made on Twitter, where she hoped her mother rots in hell. As for Brenda, despite being fully aware that her actions were utterly wrong and not making a single attempt to reach out or contact her family throughout her decade-long absence, she claimed she never stopped thinking about her family, her children, and her parents. She ended up receiving a 1-year jail sentence for violating the terms of her probation. The probation had been imposed due to her use of a stolen driver's license during a traffic stop. She was set free on November 19, 2014. Following her release, Brenda relocated to Texas to live with her mother, with reports suggesting that she planned to pursue mental health treatment before attempting to reunite with her children. The disappearance of Kamaya Mobley. On the 10th of July, 1998, Shanera Mobley, who was 16 years old at the time, welcomed a vibrant little girl into the world in Jacksonville, Florida, and named her Kamaya. Despite her difficult life circumstances, Shanera viewed Kamaya's birth as an opportunity to turn things around and finally make something of herself. Shortly afterward, a woman dressed in scrubs walked through room 328 and met Shanera, who was with her daughter, and introduced herself as a nurse, but there was more to her than meets the eye. Unbeknownst to Shanera, this particular woman was feeling particularly hopeless that day after leaving her job at a Charleston nursing home. She was in an oppressive relationship, she'd been deprived custody of her children, and, perhaps most distressing of all, she was reeling from a physical and mental trauma of having recently suffered a horrible miscarriage. Overwhelmed with postpartum depression, she drove to Florida's University Medical Center, stood outside the nursery for a few moments, and peered at all the newborns before walking into Shanera's room, where she found both mother and daughter. For hours, the woman remained by Shanera's side, offering her solace under the guise of being just a regular nurse. Eventually, she mentioned that it was time to take the infant out to measure her temperature. Instead, she stuffed baby Kamaya in a leather bag, walked out of the hospital, and drove far away. When her family members asked about where the baby came from, she lied about going into labor and subsequently giving birth at work. Back in Florida, Shanera was frantically calling out for her missing daughter. While police were able to construct a facial composite of the woman based on information provided by Shanera and other witnesses, the hunt for Kamaya's kidnapper bore no fruit. And as the years went by, with no new leads to speak of, what happened to Kamaya remained a mystery. Following a settlement with the former University Medical Center, Shanera was awarded $1.5 million in compensation due to the hospital's negligence. As for Kamaya, for 18 years nobody knew her whereabouts, not even whether or not she was still alive. As Shanera Mobley labored to cobble together the pieces of her life following Kamaya's abduction, Gloria Williams, the woman responsible for Kamaya's kidnapping, found that things in her world began to fit back into place. She broke free of her abusive relationship, regained custody of her children, got remarried, and raised Kamaya as her own under a new name, Alexis Manigault. During her childhood in South Carolina, Alexis experienced a surprisingly cheerful upbringing. She was surrounded by family and friends, going to school, playing with her siblings, and regularly inviting friends over. As Alexis grew older and reached the age of 16, she unearthed a shocking secret kept hidden from her for many years. She didn't have a social security number, an essential requirement to get a driver's license or find work, and it became evident something wasn't quite right. It was then that Alexis confronted her so-called mother about it, who confessed that she had stolen her away as an infant. Even though Williams initially proposed to turn herself in, Alexis rejected the idea. Real or not, she wasn't about to lose the woman she viewed as her mother. January 2017, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 2 anonymous tips that eventually led them to Walterboro, one of which came from a friend who said Alexis had confessed to them. The other was a person who claimed they overheard Alexis talking about Gloria not being her real mother. After officers confronted Gloria and conducted DNA tests, it was proven beyond any doubt that Alexis Manigault was in fact Kamaya Mobley all along. When she heard the news, Shanera was filled with joy. Even though she went on to have more kids, her firstborn child never left her mind, nor her heart. When the two were eventually reunited, it wasn't precisely the joyful reunion Shanera always fantasized about. After all, for Alexis, Gloria Williams was her real mother. In February 2018, Williams pleaded guilty to kidnapping and interfering with custody under state law. During testimony at Williams' trial, Shanera spoke of the overwhelming grief she suffered after having her baby girl stolen from her. As for Williams, she conveyed nothing but remorse in her testimony. Unfortunately for her, this wasn't enough to sway the judge. Williams was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years behind bars. Despite what she's done, Kamaya refuses to cut ties with her other mother. In a heart-wrenching interview, 20 years after her daughter's kidnapping, Shanera Mobley revealed that she and Kamaya were no longer on speaking terms. The disappearance of Denise Bolser. On January 17, 1985, 24-year-old Denise Desrousseaux Bolser disappeared from her Raymond, New Hampshire abode. When her husband arrived home later that day, it took him 6 hours to notice the mysterious note pinned on their fridge, which read, "We've got your wife." When police arrived, all they could find were footprints in the snow, yet no sign of Denise herself. After the note was left at Denise's home, no demand for a ransom or attempts to contact anyone were made, leaving no additional clues as to who wrote it or their intentions. After several days of investigation, police were eventually led to Logan Airport, where they stumbled upon her husband's pickup truck with Denise's social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards placed on the front seat, yet Denise was nowhere to be found. Despite their best efforts, no clues could be found that could explain what happened to Denise or where she could have possibly gone. Her family, with whom she had a close bond, strongly suspected something sinister may have taken place when she suddenly left. Her husband was never suspected to have been involved with her disappearance, and he eventually filed for divorce. Law enforcement investigated the idea that she may have been abducted or possibly killed, yet concrete proof supporting this theory eluded them also. It wouldn't be until a few months after Denise's untimely disappearance that a new clue was uncovered. The courier service, where she had served as a bookkeeper, blamed her for stealing anywhere between $12,000 to $100,000, pointing to the possibility that she had gone into hiding due to financial troubles. In 1986, embezzlement charges were brought against Denise. 7 years later, the allegations against her were dismissed, and her family grew optimistic that she would one day reach out to them. In 2002, Shirley Casey, a private investigator, provided authorities with information regarding a woman living in Florida who fit Denise's description and shared her date of birth. Almost 17 years later, law enforcement was once again on Denise's trail, and on May 13, 2002, she was located in Panama City, Florida, now going by the name of Denise James. Unbeknownst to her old family, or anyone else for that matter, she had begun a new life and started a family for herself. When finally confronted, Denise confessed that her decision to flee was made after her ex-employer threatened to kill her within 2 days. Furthermore, Denise revealed that, while attempting to cover her tracks, she had gone to the Bahamas, California, South Carolina, and Hawaii. With the mystery solved, Denise was finally able to experience an emotional and joyous reunion with her family. The disappearance of Lucy Ann Johnson. Lucy Ann Johnson, formerly Lucy Ann Carvel, was born on October 14, 1935, in Skagway, Alaska. Lucy lived out her early childhood in the cities of Bennett and Pennington before her family moved to the Yukon community of Carcross, where she was 8 years old. It wasn't until 1953 that she left Carcross, however, and after doing so, there wasn't much contact between Lucy and her relatives. In 1954, Lucy met Marvin Johnson. The couple fell in love and soon tied the knot before relocating to Surrey in British Columbia, Canada. While Lucy found a job at a hospital, Marvin worked on a tugboat, and together they made ends meet for their 2 children, Linda and Daniel. Life working on a tugboat can be full of hardship that Marvin sought refuge from via alcohol. Before long, the already short-tempered Marvin no longer had control over his actions and would often lash out or sometimes even assault Lucy. Linda, Lucy's daughter, later mentioned that she didn't recall her father ever being explicitly violent, but he implied he was physically abusive towards her mother. One day, in 1961, Lucy suddenly disappeared without a trace. However, it took Marvin until 1965 to report her missing, 4 years after she had been gone. It was only after police confronted him about it after receiving an anonymous tip from one of the neighbors, who were worried that they hadn't seen Lucy in quite some time. When police officers questioned him, Marvin reaffirmed what the neighbor had already told them, that Lucy's been gone since 1961. Initially, authorities suspected foul play when one of the neighbors recalled seeing Marvin digging in his backyard. However, upon inspecting the premises, police officers failed to uncover anything, meaning there was insufficient proof to accuse Marvin of murdering his wife. In any case, DNA samples from Lucy's kids were taken and would later routinely be evaluated for similarities in unidentified bodies, yet no matches were ever found. After his wife had been gone for some time, Marvin became reluctant to utter her name. Later on, he remarried and prohibited Linda and Daniel from mentioning their mother in any capacity whatsoever. Unfortunately, Lucy's son, Daniel, passed away in his late teens. As for Linda, despite her mother disappearing when she was only 7 years old, she went on to live a fulfilling life, later marrying and becoming a grandmother of 10. In 2013, Lucy's disappearance went on to become one of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's oldest and most enduring cold cases. 5 decades later, Linda, who was in her 50s by now, slowly began resigning herself to the fact that Lucy was gone forever. But before relinquishing all hope, she decided to try something no one thought would work. Hoping to locate her mother, whom she knew was from Alaska, Linda placed an ad in the Yukon News. The advertisement contained Lucy's full name, as well as her date of birth, birthplace, and the names of her parents. This was, by all means, a last-ditch effort to, at the very least, find some closure. What happened next, however, wasn't what Linda was expecting. After a few weeks, an astonishing phone call came to Rhonda Glenn in Whitehorse, Yukon. Her brother, Howard, was working when he noticed something profoundly strange. An advertisement was placed by someone searching for their mother, who shared the same name and personal info as their own mom. This left Rhonda dumbfounded. Rhonda gave in to curiosity and eventually contacted Linda. As soon as Rhonda and Linda began speaking on the phone, a connection between them was palpable. As the two conversed with one another, they began to slowly realize, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were related. Excited, Linda quickly began making preparations for a trip that was long overdue. As she stepped off the plane in Whitehorse, she was welcomed with open arms by a large gathering of family members she never knew she had. Her half-sister, Rhonda, half-brother, and 2 aunts were all eagerly awaiting to meet outside the airport's fenced area. Among the family, none was more excited to see Linda than Lucy, who immediately recognized her daughter despite having never seen her for more than 50 years. As it turned out, Lucy Ann Johnson was alive and well in 2013, more than 5 decades after she vanished. She had stayed put in British Columbia until the 1980s before moving to the Yukon Territory. After remarrying and giving birth to 4 kids, Lucy explained that her disappearance hadn't been intentional, but rather circumstantial, a claim which ended up vindicating her former husband Marvin, who passed away during the 1990s, from all accusations related to his alleged involvement in her vanishing act. Upon being questioned regarding her disappearance, Lucy confessed that it had to do with Marvin's abusive behavior and that she attempted to take her kids with her, but Marvin wouldn't let them go. After finding out about her mother, Linda still had to deal with everything that happened. Even though it was tough, she said that she wasn't mad at her mother and hoped that Lucy would want to meet her great-grandchildren. In an interview, Linda stated that she still had a lot of questions, but is mostly hoping for the best and that her family could be welcomed into her mother's life. The disappearance of Tamara Milograd. On a blissful Saturday morning on September 18, 1971, 15-year-old Tamara Milograd and two of her closest friends made their way to the nearby city of Melbourne, where the renowned Royal Melbourne Show was taking place, an eagerly anticipated annual carnival event. The carnival brought together farmers, food, and entertainment, drawing in hundreds of thousands of people annually. Before that, going to the carnival, Tamara informed her fretful mother, Rubel, of her plans to attend the exhibition with some of her classmates. When Rubel heard there would be many people present, she wanted to accompany Tamara and her friends to keep an eye on things. However, Tamara seemed fiercely opposed to this idea, pointing out that she and her friends can look out for one another and that her mom wouldn't be interested in the games. After a hasty farewell to her mother, Tamara hopped in the car with friends for an exciting day at the bustling exhibition. Sheep shearing and horse racing were just a few of the captivating activities available. Alpaca displays, poultry competitions, log chopping events, and more were also within arm's reach for the kids to enjoy. As they walked around the carnival, Tamara, who up to this point seemed disinterested and uneasy, informed her friends that she was going to look for a place to exchange some money as she was out of change, promising to return shortly. Anxiety swirled among her friends as Tamara's absence grew worryingly extended. After a while, they began to look for Tamara in places where she might have gone, yet there was no sign of her. Desperately scouring for someone, Tamara's friends had no choice but to frantically call her family. Her parents rushed to the venue immediately and, after hours of fruitless search efforts, soon realized there was no sign of her anywhere on the premises. Without delay, they swiftly alerted Australian authorities of the situation. Police officers escalated the search efforts to encompass nearby areas of the exhibition. Yet, after days of tirelessly looking for her, there was no sign of 15-year-old Tamara. After delving into her personal relationships with her parents, police uncovered that Tamara was going through a period of adolescent rebellion. Additionally, Eugene, Tamara's older brother, said that she was a handful before vanishing. Tamara was highly introverted, often skipped school, and the tension between her and her family members became unbearable at times. In fact, she once escaped through her bedroom window for days on end before finally returning home. Furthermore, Tamara's closest friends informed the police that shortly before she vanished, there was a heated argument between her and her family about going out with her boyfriend. After this altercation, Tamara would be frequently heard talking about fleeing her home and starting a new life. Nonetheless, police began searching for witnesses who may have spotted Tamara. Meanwhile, Tamara's family launched a multifaceted campaign, distributing printouts throughout the streets and shopping malls in hopes that someone may recognize Tamara or have valuable information regarding her disappearance. In the ensuing months, police learned from several eyewitnesses that Tamara was spotted a few days after she went missing. Some witnesses claimed that Tamara had been lurking in the stables at the fair for 2 days following her mysterious disappearance. Yet, after arriving on the premises, police officers found no trace of her. It was also rumored that Tamara had been working in a bar near the waterfront of St. Kilda, an area located on Melbourne's southern side. Additionally, a friend of Tamara's allegedly caught sight of her at a hotel in Laverton. This, along with Tamara's complicated relationship with her family, prompted the authorities to presume that she indeed departed of her own free will. Nevertheless, her family refused to give up their search for her. They hired a private investigator to look into Tamara's possible whereabouts and even traveled to every place where she was rumored to be spotted, yet returned empty-handed every time. Throughout the years, despite the passage of time and their daughter's case growing cold, her parents held on to their hope that Tamara would one day come back. After 18 years of agonizing over Tamara's disappearance, her father tragically passed away without ever finding out the truth. In 2010, Melbourne launched its Missing Persons Week, and among the stories shared was Tamara's. In 2015, a woman stumbled upon Tamara's picture whilst browsing the AFP Missing Persons website and saw a woman that looked an awful lot like her own mother, the only difference being her mom had a different name. Corrina Russell suffered the loss of her mother in a car accident in 1976 when she was but a few years old. Later in life, Corrina found out that her father and mother never wed, as for some reason her mother couldn't get a birth certificate. This piqued Corrina's curiosity, and she began looking for answers regarding her mother's real identity. There were remarkable similarities between Pauline Tammy Russell, her mother, and Tamara Milograd. Apart from sharing the same birth date, the resemblance was also uncanny. Corrina reached out to the National Missing Persons Coordination Center and told them she thought the woman from the photo could be her mother. Unbeknownst to her, the information she was about to discover would alter her life in a monumental way. To determine if Pauline Tammy Russell was, in fact, Tamara Milograd, Tamara's family was contacted and a DNA sample from one of her siblings was collected. The results were analyzed by an expert from the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, who verified that the DNA sample provided was a match with Corrina's own genetic material. After an astonishing 44 years of not knowing what happened to Tamara, her family was, at last, able to uncover the truth. Not only did Tamara sever all ties with her previous family, but she also moved elsewhere in Victoria and changed both her age to 18 and name to Pauline Tammy Russell, having 2 kids afterward before tragically losing her life in a car crash. After 4 long decades, Tamara's family finally got the closure they had been searching for. Although it was agonizing for Tamara's now 90-year-old mother to discover what became of her daughter, finally learning the fate of her beloved 15-year-old child may have proved comforting to some extent. Tamara's family was finally able to leave the past in their wake, and a bittersweet outcome ensued. As for Corrina, Tamara's family welcomed her into the fold with open arms. The disappearance of Stephen Kubacki. On a cold winter day in February 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubacki, an undergraduate student at Hope College, a quaint and intimate Christian college located by the shores of Lake Michigan, inexplicably disappeared without a trace. Stephen decided to go on a daring skiing journey alone, planning to stay 1 or 2 days, but never came back. The day after his excursion, snowmobilers in Sagatuck noticed Stephen's cross-country skis discarded with a backpack near them and quickly reached out to law enforcement. Upon examining the contents of this pack, they concluded that it belonged to Stephen, prompting an immediate search and rescue mission for him. The trail of 200 yards he left in the snow went past the lake's edge, then abruptly ended. This led investigators to conclude that Kubacki, more than likely, met his fate under a thick layer of ice and drowned. The mysterious Lake Michigan Triangle, spanning Manitowoc, Wisconsin to Ludington, Michigan, and down to Benton Harbor, is where Stephen had gone missing. This unforgiving landscape of the U.S. is steeped in mystery. The Lake Michigan Triangle may not be as famous as the Bermuda Triangle, but is certainly just as terrifying. In 1891, the 7-man crew of a schooner named Thomas Hume set out to sail across the lake in search of lumber, but they never returned, and no trace of their vessel was ever found. Many other unexplained flight mishaps, ghost ship sightings, disappearances, and weather conditions that go from one extreme to the other in a matter of minutes have been attributed to this eerie region since then. After Stephen went missing, search teams combed the area he was last seen in. Eventually, they found his skis and poles on the lake's beach, as well as footsteps leading up to its frozen surface. There was no sign of Stephen's body. It was as if he had vanished into the ether. On the 5th of May, 1979, 14 and a half months since his ill-fated trip, Stephen returned to his father's house and simply rang the doorbell. He seemed disoriented, as if he had just woken up from a really long nap, and was in utter disbelief that it had been more than a year. After his father embraced him, Stephen recalled having a faint memory of what happened during his absence. He was jolted awake in a meadow almost 40 miles from his father's house and 700 miles from Lake Michigan. He was dressed in weird clothes, and beside him was an unfamiliar backpack containing maps that did not belong to him. He was also entirely unaware of the events that led up to this peculiar predicament. What is, perhaps, most intriguing about Stephen's case is what he was wearing, a t-shirt from a Wisconsin marathon. He remarked in an interview that, "I feel like I've done a lot of running." As for his last memories, they were of the snow-capped shores of Lake Michigan. The mysterious events surrounding Stephen's disappearance remain an unsolved riddle to this day. Some think he simply went into a coma and wandered aimlessly across the country, while others believe he fell victim to the Lake Michigan Triangle, an area with no shortage of unexplainable phenomenon. Some wilder theories even suggest that aliens kidnapped him for experimentation. Again and again, reporters questioned Stephen on what happened to him, to which he responded that he really didn't recall much of anything. Despite all of this, he remained insistent on the fact that he had no mental health issues to speak of. During a later interview, he revealed details of his abrupt disappearance and discussed what might have been behind it all. He reasoned his blackout was likely due to fatigue or overexposure and revealed that he would be seeing a physician for a checkup, but he emphatically refused any form of psychiatrist counseling. "My father was going to sign over the house to me. I had 3 courses at school and no trouble. I left a romance in Germany. There was no trouble with girls. I had a job lined up with the Holland Sentinel newspaper." Presently, Kubaki is alive and well in the Pacific Northwest, where he works as a psychologist, an admittedly amusing twist of fate. The disappearance of John Darwin. On the 14th of August, 1950, John Darwin was born in Hartlepool, a vibrant and bustling port town situated in County Durham, England. 23 years later, John married Anne Stephenson in Blackhall on December 22nd. He then went on to teach science and mathematics for 18 years before later becoming a prison officer. One day, on 21st of March 2002, John set out on a canoe ride and never returned home. Anne, his wife, was frantic when she noticed it had gone late and he still hadn't come back, prompting the police and Coast Guard to launch an expansive search in hopes of locating him. The following morning, the paddle John used during his voyage was found drifting in the ocean near Seaton Carew. As for John, there were no clues to suggest where he was. 6 weeks later, his dilapidated boat was located near North Gare in a secluded area known as the Blue Lagoon, situated by the River Tees. After 6 months of anguish and slowly losing hope of his survival, Anne stated that all she wanted was to bury John's body, as it would enable her to move on. In April of the subsequent year, Darwin was formally declared dead in an inquest with a concluded open verdict. His death certificate noted that the sea had claimed his life. With her husband's death certificate in hand, Anne was able to accumulate a grand total of nearly £250,000 in payouts, consisting of a staggering £137,000 from Norwich Union, an insurance company, his prison service pension, worth £58,000, a life insurance policy worth £25,000, and his teacher's pension, valued at £25,000. However, unbeknownst to anyone, apart from his wife, John was alive and well. Throughout his constant job changes, from a teacher for 18 years to banking and finally prison officer, Darwin was driven by his never-ending quest for wealth. He remained confident that he would someday make it big. Ronald, his 91-year-old father, exclaimed, "He had ideas above his station. He had big dreams and ambitions, and I sometimes think he was in too much of a hurry to make money." John Darwin was obsessed with the prospect of becoming a millionaire. Even at his mother's funeral, money was all he would talk about. At one point, he purchased numerous inexpensive properties in the Durham area in hopes of renting them out. When that didn't work out, he moved over to trading stocks. Soon enough, John had an astounding 17 phone lines installed in their house so that he could play the stock market during his leisure time, although that endeavor also proved unsuccessful. Growing desperate, John tried to at least formulate an illusion of wealth by purchasing a £40,000 Range Rover. Behind the scenes, however, his investments had already gone astray, and debt collectors came knocking at the couple's doorstep in 2001. Overwhelmed with debt, but too prideful to declare bankruptcy and unwilling to give up the prospect of coming out on top, Darwin devised a plan. He would stage his own death and collect the life insurance. Not long after his supposed death, Darwin went into hiding, but would frequently drop by his marital home, most often during the night. He would seclude himself in a small one-roomed apartment adjacent to his own home and stay there during the day. Then at night, he'd make use of a hidden doorway concealed behind a wardrobe to gain access to his family's home without being seen or heard by anyone, apart from his wife. Not even their own children knew that he was still alive. To ensure his presence remained undetected, Darwin poured concrete over the floorboards of the hidden passage to stifle any creaking. Gradually, Darwin grew bolder and more confident in this charade of his. He would stroll around in the daylight, wearing nothing but a woolly hat and hobbling as if he was suffering from some sort of injury to conceal his identity. Should any visitors decide to drop by unannounced during one of his visits, he would disguise himself as Tom, the handyman, donning an inexpensive wig and glasses. Whenever relatives came to stay, he'd vanish through the same entrance behind his bedroom wardrobe. As time passed and Darwin became more confident that his deceitful plan had gone unnoticed, he applied for credit cards in his own name, utilizing none other than the address of his small hideout. Throughout his years of hiding, he was spotted plenty of times by different people who knew him personally. In 2003, Darwin chanced upon a former prison colleague. When police found out about this chance encounter, Anne managed to lie and convince police officers that the colleague had made a mistake and that the man he saw was just a cousin who looked just like John. One day, one of his tenants also recognized him when he passed by them and asked, "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" Darwin grew nervous and begged the man to not tell anyone, and the tenant reluctantly agreed. As a way of refabricating his identity, Darwin intently searched local cemeteries for the grave of a child born at roughly the same time as himself, then applied for a copy of their birth certificate, only to use it to secure a passport. After contriving yet another ambitious plan, he utilized his passport to journey to America in 2004, where he had made contact with Kelly Steele, a mother of 3 from Kansas, through an online role-playing game. He also persuaded Kelly to purchase a 20-acre ranch using £25,000 of his own money. Darwin reportedly lied to her about having made a fortune on the stock market and told her that he always wanted to become a cowboy. Shortly after his arrival at the U.S., his tone quickly shifted when he began aggressively demanding his money back from Kelly, sending her sinister emails that left her fearing for her safety. John Darwin then continued to pursue his ambitions of becoming a multi-millionaire. He flew to Panama City, where he managed to start a company. He later bought a lavish 25,000-pound Toyota Land Cruiser along with the 50,000-pound flat. After successfully selling 2 properties in Seaton Carew for a collective sum of 455,000 pounds, he made the decision to invest an additional 200,000 pounds into a sprawling estate near the Panama Canal, which he planned on turning into a tourist resort. In the meantime, police had already been tipped off that he might be still alive and living in Panama. The lies further started to unravel on 14th of July 2006, when a picture of him and his wife property hunting in Panama was posted. When Panama began implementing new visa regulations, Darwin knew that his identity would now have to go through a lengthy approval process, and this time he couldn't rely on his alias to keep him hidden. He then constructed another of his devious ploys. He decided to return home and pretend to be afflicted with amnesia. On the evening of December 1st, 2007, 57-year-old John Darwin walked into the West End Central Police Station with an astonishing confession. He declared, "I think I am a missing person." He was able to provide his name, date of birth, and other identifying information with ease. However, he stated that he could not recall where he had been in the past 5.5 years. In an effort to get to the bottom of where Darwin's been over the past 5.5 years, Cleveland Police and the Metropolitan Police joined forces for a collaborative investigation. Anne, who was completely overwhelmed with joy, took to the media to express her excitement at her husband's survival. Due to the aforementioned Panama photo, and thanks to the numerous individuals who Darwin was spotted by over the years, police were able to put together evidence that invalidated his plea of amnesia and brought him in front of a judge. In 2008, after confessing to 8 deception charges, Darwin was convicted and incarcerated for a sentence of 6 years and 3 months. His wife Anne was also charged with fraud and money laundering, later receiving a sentence of 6.5 years. As we draw the curtain on these awe-inspiring narratives, we can't help but marvel at the sheer complexity and unpredictability of life. Always remember that reality can often eclipse the strangest of fiction, and that not every lost tale concludes with an end.